The story begins with a young love, gentle, innocent. Their future seemed full of promise. But without warning, she suddenly disappeared, especially when her child was about to be born. What started as a missing person case soon spiraled into one of the most shocking and heartbreaking crimes the Dominican Republic had ever seen. This is the story of Emily Peguero, a story of love, betrayal, and a desperate fight for justice that would shake an entire country. Emily was born on July 12, 2001, in Cenoví, a small town about an hour's drive from Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. She was the youngest child of Adalgisa Polanco and Gennaro Peguero. Even as she grew older, her older siblings continued to treat her like their little baby, constantly shielding her from life's hardships. Pretty, cheerful, and kind-hearted, Emily, with her signature dimples, dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day. She wanted to help those who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. Growing up in a humble household, she promised herself that she would work pro bono to bring justice to people like her own family. Emily was deeply empathetic and always sought to make the world a better place in whatever small way she could. The Peguero family lived in a modest house with shuttered windows, a flat roof, and a faded butterfly mural painted across the front wall. Her parents worked multiple low-paying jobs just to make ends meet. Despite the lack of luxuries, Emily was always provided with what mattered most: love, care, and a sense of security. The family's financial struggles never dimmed her spirit. She is very good at studying, friendly and outgoing, enjoys spending time with friends and family. Emily enjoyed applying stage makeup, dressing up in costumes, and putting on little performances to make her loved ones laugh. For her parents, all the daily worries disappeared whenever they watched their youngest daughter dancing and smiling. The Peguero family might not have had much, but they were rich in love, warmth. That was enough. When Emily turned 15, she began dating a boy named Marlon Martinez, who was 18 at the time. They had known each other since childhood, and their relationship had blossomed from a gentle friendship into young love. Marlon had been born in the United States, but when he was around 8 or 9 years old, his family returned to the Dominican Republic and settled in a large house with a manicured front yard, directly across from Emily's humble home. His mother and stepfather were financially well off, sending him to a prestigious private school in the suburbs. Marlon's mother, Marlon Martinez, was a prominent political figure. At one point, she had even served as the deputy mayor of the province. At the time of the events, she worked for the government, handling visa and passport services and participating in various political campaigns. This position gave her access to influential people and powerful connections. Rumors circulated that Marlon often used her authority to help certain individuals obtain documents illegally, that many people owed her favors. She was never held accountable, as there was always someone protecting her from the consequences. To be honest, Marlon was not a pleasant woman. Emily's father, who had once worked as a private security guard for her, knew firsthand how aggressive, short-tempered she could be. She acted as if her money and influence placed her above everyone else. The townspeople whispered behind her back, calling her the devil for her arrogance. Cruelty, driven by political ambition and career demands, Marlon often needed help caring for her 3 sons, including Marlon. Instead of hiring a professional nanny, she turned to her neighbor, Adalgisa, Emily's mother, and paid Adalgisa to look after the boys while she worked. Every morning, Marlon would send her children across the street to Adalgisa's house, where they spent hours under her care. The children from both families quickly became inseparable, spending long afternoons playing together in the quiet neighborhood. The Martinez boys often slept overnight at the Peguero home, a sign that Marlon had great confidence in Adalgisa's care for her sons. Despite their stark social differences, the two families developed a surprisingly close bond through these everyday interactions. For years, All the children treated one another like siblings. But as they grew older, life slowly pulled them in different directions, and their once frequent visits became occasional. When Emily turned 15 and Marlon was 18, the two reconnected. At first, they were simply spending time together, reminiscing about their childhood. But soon, friendship turned into something deeper. As secret romances, the legal age of marriage in the Dominican Republic is 18, and Emily is still a minor. Her family disapproved, mostly because of Marlon's mother. Marlon was known for her arrogance and temper. She had recently quarreled with another neighbor over a trivial issue, further damaging her reputation. Yet Marlon himself seemed nothing like his mother. He was polite, quiet, and in a way, almost like a member of the Peguero family. Emily's father, Genaro, does not like this relationship, but cannot stop it. His daughter was clearly in love, and he didn't want to push her away. However, deep down, Genaro still felt uneasy, mainly because he knew what kind of person Marlon was. By 2017, as Emily's 16th birthday approached, her relationship with Marlon seemed stable. They were young, happy, and hopeful about the future. But that spring, something unexpected happened. Emily began to feel unwell and didn't understand why. Marlon, being older, quickly realized what might be going on. A few tests later, their fears were confirmed. Emily was pregnant. The news shocked both of them. In the Dominican Republic, abortion is prohibited in nearly all circumstances. It's considered a criminal offense. And since 2012, anyone assisting in an abortion, doctors, friends, or family, can face prison time. Emily, terrified and confused, knew she would have to carry the baby to term. She herself was still a child. Not knowing how she could raise another child, Marlon tried to reassure her, promising that everything would be fine. But Emily was terrified to tell her parents. She didn't know how they would react. Disappointment, anger, shame. Eventually, she gathered her courage and confided in her mother and older sister. Her father, I didn't find out until much later. One afternoon, about 5 months into the pregnancy, Genaro came home during his lunch break. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed the uneasy looks on his wife's and daughter's faces. When he asked what was wrong, Adalgisa told him the truth. Their youngest daughter was 5 months pregnant. For a few moments, he couldn't speak. He was heartbroken, angry, and scared all at once. After half an hour of silence, he finally told his wife he would talk to the young couple, but that he needed time to process the news first. Tragically, Genaro would never get that chance. He learned about Emily's pregnancy just 9 days before she disappeared. About a week later, Roberto Cabrera, Marlon's stepfather, visited Genaro, suggested they meet to discuss the baby's future. Genaro agreed. Together with Marlon and Roberto, they sat down to talk. Marlon assured Genaro that he would take responsibility for the child and care for Emily. Roberto also promised to support the child in any way possible. That conversation eased Genaro's worries somewhat, though he still struggled to accept that his little girl was about to become a mother. He set one condition: Emily and the baby would stay with Peguero family after the birth. Since she was still a minor, both families would share the responsibility of caring for the child until Emily turned 18. Marlon seemed to agree, and Roberto supported the plan. But there was one person who was far from happy about the situation: Marlon. For her son's relationship with a poor teenage girl and pregnancy was not only inconvenient, it was an embarrassment she wanted to erase at any cost. She believed Marlon throwing his future away. In her mind, this child would ruin everything: his education, his ambitions, and the family's spotless reputation. Marlon feared what people would say if they learned that her son, from a respectable and well-off household, had gotten a girl from a modest background pregnant. She had tolerated their teenage relationship in silence, convincing herself It was just a passing phase. But pregnancy, in her eyes, was an unforgivable mistake. On the morning of August 23, 2017, 16-year-old Emily woke up earlier than usual. Adalgisa noticed and asked where she was headed so early. Emily smiled softly and said that Marlon had promised to take her to a doctor's appointment to pick up her test results. Adalgisa saw her to the front door, watched Emily get into Marlon's car and drive away. Completely unaware that it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive, the morning passed quietly. Adalgisa prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, and waited for Emily to return. But as the clock ticked past the hour, a faint sense of unease began to creep in. Emily was always punctual, and if she were delayed, she would at least send a message or call. By late morning, Adalgisa's unease had grown into panic. At 11:30 a.m., Emily's sister received a strange text message. It said that Marlon had dropped Emily off at a gas station because she wanted to meet her uncle. The message should have been reassuring, but instead, it sent chills down their spines. Emily never sent texts. She preferred voice messages, and she had never mentioned meeting her uncle before. Even the tone of the message was off. It didn't sound like her at all. Something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, Adalgisa sent her older daughter to Martina's house. When Marlon opened the door, he appeared calm and explained that on their way to the clinic, Emily realized she had mixed up the dates. The test results wouldn't be ready until Friday. According to him, Emily then asked to be dropped off at a gas station because she was meeting her uncle. He said he gave her some money, watched her get in the car and drive away. That, he said, was the last time he saw her. But Adalgisa didn't believe him. Together with her elder daughter, she rushed to the gas station and asked the employees to review the security footage. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. There was no sign of Emily or Marlon at the station that morning. Either Marlon had made a mistake, or he was lying. Yet, when confronted again, Marlon stubbornly repeated his story. By the afternoon, Adalgisa's panic had turned into full-blown terror. She called the police to report her pregnant teenage daughter missing. The family began printing and distributing flyers with Emily's face, hoping someone had seen her. Deep down, though, they didn't believe she had been kidnapped by a stranger. They were certain the answer lay much closer to home, with Marlon and his mother. When speaking to reporters, Adalgisa didn't hide her suspicions. Her husband, Genaro, had recently discovered disturbing messages on Emily's phone, texts from Marlon's mother, sent 4 days before Emily disappeared. The messages showed that she had been pressuring Emily to terminate her pregnancy, offering to help her end it quietly at home. She promised that everything would go smoothly, that Emily had nothing to fear. Emily initially refused, but after days of emotional pressure, she seemed to give in, agreeing to let Marlon assist her. For Emily's parents, those messages were proof of a sinister plan. They believed Marlon was desperate to erase the shame of an unplanned pregnancy, no matter the cost. When Genaro handed those messages to investigators, suspicion toward the Martinez family intensified. What shocked everyone most was that Marlon immediately hired a lawyer, something no innocent teenager would do. The gesture spoke volumes, suggesting guilt, not grief. After the first 24 hours passed with no sign of Emily, fear spread throughout the neighborhood. Rumors began to swirl. Everyone whispered that the Martinez family had something to do with her disappearance. At home, Genaro was a man shattered. He couldn't stop imagining what might have happened to his daughter, whether she was cold, hurt, or terrified somewhere. Calling out for help he couldn't give. Alone, he cried quietly, his body trembling with despair. But in front of his family, he forced himself to stay strong. He knew that if they saw him break down, their hope would shatter completely. After news of Emily, the missing pregnant girl, spread throughout the community. Rumors of her boyfriend's family's involvement began to circulate. Marlon and his mother decided to hold a press conference to deny the rumors and clear their name. Using her wide network of contacts, Marlon invited several reporters to attend, hoping to quickly put an end to the public suspicion surrounding her family. The conference was held in the living room of the Martinez family home. Marlon appeared in a simple t-shirt and jeans, visibly uneasy. Throughout the interview, he kept his head down, his hands trembling as he spoke. His mother, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Elegantly dressed in a formal suit, with her hair perfectly styled, exuding confidence and authority. Having previously served as a deputy and local government official, she was accustomed to addressing the public. Even so, the first questions were directed at her son. Marlon recounted the same story he had told before. Then, for the first time, he looked straight into the camera and pleaded for Emily to return home. He admitted that, like any couple, they had problems, but insisted that their families had accepted the unexpected pregnancy and were excited for the baby's arrival. After he finished, Marlon took over the conversation, firmly denying every accusation against her family. She claimed that neither she nor her son had anything to do with Emily's disappearance, asserting that on that same morning, Marlon had accompanied Emily's grandmother to the consulate to handle paperwork, an attempt to present an alibi, and emphasize how close the two families supposedly were. During the press event, Marlon repeatedly stressed that Emily was like part of their family, and that they loved her deeply. She referred to Emily as the girl who carried her future grandchild, saying they were as worried for her safety as the Peguero family was. However, instead of clearing their names, the press conference only raised more suspicion. People found it odd that the Martinez family had not invited the Peguero family to speak as well. To the public, the event seemed less like a genuine plea for truth and more like a staged attempt at self-defense. Viewers also noticed a chilling detail. Both mother and son spoke about Emily in the past tense, as if they already knew she was dead. This small but telling slip convinced many that they knew far more about what had happened than they were admitting. Soon, public opinion turned completely against them. Many came to believe it was a classic case of a wealthy, powerful family silencing a poor young girl to protect their reputation. Instead of calming speculation, the press conference had only fueled the outrage. Despite the mounting tension, Marlon decided to visit the Peguero family home. Seeing their grief-stricken faces, he realized there was no escaping the situation. Feeling cornered, and fearing what would come next, he went to the police and turned himself in. On August 26, 2017, Marlon Martinez was officially arrested as the main suspect in Emily's disappearance and placed in a detention center. But the most crucial question remained unanswered. Was Emily still alive? 5 days after Emily went missing, on Monday, August 28, police had a breakthrough. They managed to trace Emily's phone signal to an apartment in the upscale San Francisco de Macorís district, an apartment belonging to Marlene Martinez. When officers conducted a search of the premises, they made a disturbing discovery: blood stains on a mattress and several blood-soaked towels. All the evidence was immediately sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis. Everything now pointed toward one horrifying conclusion. Whatever had happened to Emily, it had happened inside that apartment. Meanwhile, the police continued questioning potential witnesses. August 30th, 2017. The security guard of the apartment building where the Martinez family owned a flat revealed shocking information. He said that on the day Emily disappeared, August 23rd, he saw Marlon Martinez on the surveillance cameras carrying a large bag out of the building and loading it into his car. Unsure of what to do, the guard decided to call Marlon. She came downstairs to see the footage for herself. While watching the video, she became visibly nervous. A short time later, the recording mysteriously vanished. Later that same day, Marlon confessed everything to the police. The Peguero family's worst fears were confirmed. Marlon admitted that Emily was dead. He told investigators that he had left her body at a local garbage dump. The news devastated not only Emily's loved ones but also the entire community. Many people followed the story, hoping that Emily was still alive. But Marlon's confession completely extinguished that hope. Police officers, along with Marlon, immediately went to the dump he had mentioned to search for Emily's body. When the patrol car stopped near the landfill, it was surrounded by an enraged crowd. People wanted to see the accused face to face and express their fury. Grief. Officers had to fire warning shots into the air to disperse the mob. The police decided it was too dangerous to let Marlon out of the vehicle. For more than 8 hours, they sifted through piles of trash and debris, but found nothing. The next morning, August 31, 2017, the residents of Cenoví took to the streets in protest at around 9 a.m. They blocked the roads, burned tires, and threw stones, demanding that Marlon stop playing games with the Peguero family's emotions and reveal the truth about where he had hidden Emily's body. The situation became so violent that police had to intervene to restore order. Public anger continued to grow, and much of it was directed toward Marlon's mother. Many people saw her as the mastermind behind Emily's disappearance. Those who knew the Marlon family were convinced that Marlene was using her wealth and influence to protect her son. Later that day, the prayers of Emily's parents and the townspeople were finally answered. A body had been discovered in Espaillat province, about an hour's drive from Cenoví. Emily's older brother received a flood of messages from friends and strangers alike, all saying that the body of an unidentified girl had been found nearby. The police, along with the Peguero family and relatives, rushed to the scene, desperate for answers. By the time they arrived, darkness had fallen. The only light came from police vehicles and flashlights. A crowd had gathered by the roadside. In the center lay a suitcase. Inside was the decomposing body of Emily Peguero, the 16-year-old who had been 5 months pregnant. The suitcase was opened. The body was carefully removed and transported to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy was carried out promptly. It revealed that Emily had died from internal bleeding, likely caused by a failed attempt to terminate her pregnancy. She had also suffered a severe blow to the head from a blunt object. According to the forensic report, death had been almost instantaneous. She probably never had time to understand what was happening to her. When the autopsy results were made public, outrage erupted across the Dominican Republic. By that time, Emily's story had gone viral. Her photos, smiling in a red traditional Dominican dress, flooded social media. The tragedy captured worldwide attention, with celebrities sharing Emily's image and urging justice for the young girl. Her family has launched a campaign demanding the case not be buried or forgotten. Communities united to pressure the authorities and ensure that justice would prevail. Emily was laid to rest in a white casket, surrounded by hundreds of mourners holding pink balloons. Many brought flowers and small gifts to honor her memory and to support the grieving Peguero family. Meanwhile, police investigations revealed that Marlon had lied from the very beginning. He had never taken Emily to the gas station, as he had told her mother and the reporters. The text message sent from Emily's phone that morning was fake, written by Marlon himself to cover up what he had done. Instead of taking her to the clinic, Marlon drove Emily to his mother's empty apartment. There, he allegedly forced her to drink an unknown liquid intended to end her pregnancy. The substance caused internal bleeding. Emily began to panic. She may have tried to resist or escape, but in the struggle, Marlon shoved her too hard. Emma fell, struck her head, died almost instantly. Panicked, Marlon placed Emily's body in a large bag, carried it out of the apartment, and loaded it into his car. Surveillance cameras captured him at that moment. He drove aimlessly for a while. Then, in desperation, threw the bag containing Emily's body from a bridge into a ravine. Afterward, he called his mother and confessed what he had done. Marlon was furious at him for handling the matter so carelessly. She promised to fix the situation and help make sure the body wouldn't be found. Later that same day, when the apartment building guard called and showed her the surveillance footage, she realized this evidence could destroy them both. From that point on, Marlon used all her influence to protect her son. Early on the morning of August 24th, Marlon met with her son and two accomplices to decide what to do with Emily's remains. Furious that Marlon had left the body in such an obvious place, she paid a man to help relocate it. The man went to the bridge, retrieved the bag, placed Emily's body into a suitcase, and dumped it on a roadside about an hour's drive from Senovi, hoping that by the time it was discovered, no one would link it to Emily's disappearance. In the following days, police arrested 4 additional people connected to the Martinezes: Marlon's brother, one of her close friends, and 2 employees. However, all 4 cooperated with the investigation, were later released after giving testimony. None were directly involved in the murder itself. Ultimately, only Marlon and Marlon Martinez stood trial for the killing of Emily Peguero. The trial was as tense as it was emotional. During the 9 months that followed Emily's death, each court session brought new drama. Defense lawyers withdrew one after another. Outside the courthouse, local activists protested daily. Whenever Marlon appeared in court, she wore a bulletproof vest and helmet to protect her from the furious crowd that wanted vengeance. The tension was so high that, without that protection, the mob might have torn her apart on the spot. In court in April 2018, emotions inside the courtroom ran dangerously high. Emily Peguero's father, Genaro Peguero, was arrested after attempting to bring a firearm into the courthouse. His act was one of desperation. A heartbroken father who had lost faith in the system and could no longer bear the weight of his grief. When the prosecution decided to recreate the crime scene, they brought in the suitcase in which Emily's body had been found, along with her shoes and clothing. The odor of decay was so overpowering that the reenactment had to be conducted outdoors, in the courthouse parking lot. Under a scorching sun, prosecutors demonstrated how Emily's body had been folded and forced into the suitcase. For the Peguero family, watching this was almost unbearable. Already devastated, they were forced to relive the horror of how their daughter had been treated in death. Throughout the proceedings, the defense insisted that Marlon Martinez had never meant to kill Emily. But Marlon's story kept changing, each version contradicting the last. At first, he confessed to killing Emily and abandoning her body at the dump. Later, he claimed that Emily had taken a pill on her own, distraught over the pregnancy, and that her death was accidental. In a third version, he denied his mother's involvement altogether, claiming she didn't even know Emily was dead. These constant inconsistencies shattered his credibility completely. The Peguero family's attorney argued that when Marlon's attempt to induce an abortion failed, he panicked. Instead of taking Emily to the hospital and risking exposure, he decided it would be easier if she simply disappeared. He never expected her body to be found, nor the public to rise against him. The lawyer became a hero in the eyes of many Dominicans, boldly standing up to the powerful Martinez family and exposing their corruption. Of all the Peguero family, Adalgisa, Emily's older sister, suffered the deepest pain. She had once cared for Marlon and his siblings when they were children, feeding them, putting them to bed, and protecting them while their mother, Marlon, pursued her political career. For her, the betrayal was unthinkable. One of the very boys she had nurtured had grown up to take her baby sister's life. For the Peguero family, Emily's death was a devastating consequence of pride, class prejudice, and obsession with fame. The trial dragged on for months, every hearing more explosive than the last. In November 2018, a panel of 3 judges finally delivered their verdict. Marlon Martinez was found guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His mother, Marlon Martinez, was convicted of kidnapping and concealing a corpse, receiving a mere 5-year sentence. When the verdict was read, chaos erupted inside the courtroom. Angry shouts filled the air. People could not believe that a woman so deeply involved in Emily's disappearance would serve only 5 years behind bars. Protesters demanded that her sentence be increased to at least 20 years. But the court's ruling stood firm. Marlon's lawyer vowed to appeal, claiming he had never intended to kill Emily, that he had simply wanted to solve their problem, and things had gone terribly wrong. The Martinez family was also ordered to pay financial compensation to the Peguero family, though everyone knew no amount of money could ever make up for their loss. Then came another devastating blow. On May 15, 2019, the appeals court reduced Marlon's sentence to just 2 years, arguing there was insufficient proof that she had committed a crime. To the Peguero family and the Dominican public, it was an outrage. The injustice didn't end there. In September 2020, another ruling effectively ordered Marlon's immediate release. Many suspected her powerful political connections had influenced the decision. When she walked out of the correctional facility, a furious crowd waited outside, shouting insults and demanding retribution. But she didn't look back. Soon after, Marlon left the Dominican Republic and quietly resettled somewhere in the United States, far from the rage she had left behind. Meanwhile, her son Marlon remained behind bars, though even prison seemed to treat him gently. Rumors circulated that he had begun another relationship with a teenage girl and that guards occasionally allowed him to leave the facility unsupervised. Each new rumor was like another wound to the Peguero family's heart. For Emily's parent, nothing about the aftermath resembled justice. Their daughter, a bright 16-year-old who had dreamed of becoming a teacher, was gone. The people responsible for her death had managed to turn a story of brutality and loss into one more tale of power and privilege. Gennaro remembers how every morning before leaving for work, he would quietly step into his daughter's room, kiss her forehead, and whisper goodbye. It was a small ritual, something ordinary yet deeply precious. Now, that memory is what breaks him the most. In memory of his sister, Emily's brother wrote a 4-minute song recounting everything that happened to her. The love, the betrayal, and the unbearable loss. In the music video, the final scene shows him watching Marlon Martinez on television, pretending to cry at a press conference. Without saying a word, the brother stands up and smashes the TV screen. This action is a powerful symbol that reflects the anger and sadness felt by people across the country. Emily's bedroom remains exactly as she left it before her death. Red paper hearts are still taped to the headboard. Neon pink curtains flutter softly by the window. On her bedside table rest a few handmade bracelets, a small statue of Jesus, and a framed photo of the Pope. Inside her closet, her neatly folded clothes sit beside her collection of stuffed animals. The only new thing in the room is a collage of photos and farewell messages created by students from her school, a tribute to a young life stolen too soon. Across Latin America, femicide has reached devastating levels. Every year, around 200 women are murdered in the Dominican Republic alone, and that's only the official number. Many cases go unreported, buried in silence and fear. While police were searching for Emily's body, they discovered the remains of 2 other young women, both just 18. One was killed by her stepfather, the other by her boyfriend. Emily Peguero's death was only one among countless tragedies, but the brutality of her murder and the involvement of a politically connected family shook the entire nation. Her story represented resistance, grief, and the urgent need for justice in a society that frequently ignores such issues. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Elisa Matthewson. This story takes place in a small town called Valrico, Florida, with a population of about 5,000 people. Elisa was a devoted wife and a caring mother. She had been married to Trevor Summers for over 15 years, but eventually decided to file for divorce. The reason for this is Trevor's relentless need to control every aspect of Elisa's life and their children's lives. When Elisa informed Trevor of her decision to divorce, he vehemently opposed it. He began using their children as tools to manipulate her, hoping she would reconsider. Elisa and Trevor first met in 1995 while attending high school in a Philadelphia suburb. They started dating 3 years later and quickly formed a strong bond. Both were outgoing, charismatic, and serious about their future together, but they felt unprepared to settle down when to their lack of career achievements. They decided to prioritize building their careers before starting a family. In 2001, after years of dating, Elisa and Trevor got married, marking an important milestone in their lives. Their friends and family fully supported their decision. At this time, their relationship had stood the test of time. For Elisa, marriage was the realization of a long-held dream of creating a family. Soon after, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Arden. Over the years, they had 4 more children: Landon, Bryn, Grady, and Cooper. Elisa found joy in growing their family, believing that each child added more love to their lives. However, Trevor had different priorities and chose to focus on advancing his career. Trevor initially a landscaping business, but soon moved on to launching a pool building and maintenance company. After that, he ventured into real estate and pursued various other business ideas. He was passionate about being an entrepreneur, and Elisa supported him in all his efforts. However, Trevor often started businesses quickly, and most of them failed before making any significant profits. He struggled to find a clear direction, and most of his ventures didn't generate much income. Trevor's constant pursuit of new opportunities caused the family to move frequently. Over the years, they lived in Pennsylvania, Florida, Vegas, and California, finally settling permanently in Sunshine State. These relocations made homeschooling necessary for their children. Elisa took on the dual role of teacher and homemaker, while their eldest daughter, Arden, helped with chores. Despite her many responsibilities, Elisa managed everything with ease. The family often hosted guests and lively gatherings where Trevor would enthusiastically share his latest ideas. They lived in a beautiful house near the beach, creating the appearance of an ideal life. Over time, their relationship started to fall apart. Arden, the eldest daughter, recalled many happy moments. The family often spent time together at the beach, played video games, or enjoyed board games. While Arden was always close to her mother, she had an especially strong bond with her father and was often called a daddy's girl. Sadly, this close relationship later allowed Trevor to manipulate the situation. As Arden entered her teenage years, Elisa began to notice how Trevor exerted more control over her and the children. With each new child, his dominance grew, affecting every part of their daily lives. Elisa was eventually restricted to wearing only clothes Trevor approved of, socializing only with people he allowed, and having her social media activity closely monitored. He prohibited her from speaking to men online and displayed extreme jealousy. Trevor's possessiveness escalated to the point where he forbade Elisa from standing or sitting near any male strangers at church. He would become upset even if she simply walked past or greeted someone she knew. Some people, including Elisa, believed that Trevor's extreme behavior was tied to the family's financial troubles. By that time, Elisa had witnessed several business dealings that revealed Trevor was deeply in debt, often failing to pay others or collect money owed to him. He was even arrested multiple times on suspicion of financial fraud. Each time, Trevor shifted the blame onto others or external factors. It became increasingly clear that he was not suited for the business world. Despite his repeated failures, Trevor stubbornly defended his business ventures and refused to let Elisa have any input. At the same time, he tightened his control over their home life, becoming harsher and creating an even more oppressive domestic environment. By 2016, Elisa had grown weary of her life and decided to ask for a divorce. However, this was not part of Trevor's plans. He pleaded with her to stay for the sake of their children and promised to change. Still in love with him, Elisa decided to give him another chance. Unfortunately, instead of improving, Trevor became even more controlling. He confiscated her phone and car and forbade her from leaving the house, effectively trapping her as if she were a prisoner. It became clear that this was outright domestic abuse and highly dangerous. Alisa began contemplating ways to escape, unaware that Trevor was also making his own plans concerning her. By October 2016, Trevor's control over Alisa had reached an extreme level. For weeks, he had not allowed her to leave the house even once. He monitored her every move around the clock, never letting her out of his sight. This behavior alarmed Alisa, as she sensed that something terrible was about to happen. She feared what Trevor might be planning and anxiously waited for an opportunity to break free. One day, Trevor left the house to run errands but locked his family inside. Taking advantage of the rare opportunity when he was absent, Alisa secretly used her phone to contact an organization that supports victims of domestic violence. She explained that this was her first chance in weeks to act without Trevor's control. The organization warned her that her situation was urgent and extremely dangerous. That evening, when Trevor returned, he lashed out at Alisa, accusing her of ridiculous acts of infidelity and subjecting her to further emotional and physical abuse. Thankfully, the authorities had already been notified, and their timely arrival at the house pressured Trevor into letting Alisa and the children leave. Reluctantly, he agreed, though it was clear he had no intention of letting go quietly. Alisa soon faced housing challenges, forcing her and the children to seek refuge in a shelter for domestic violence survivors. The shelter provided them with protection from Trevor's control and allowed them to feel somewhat secure. Over time, the harassment stopped, much to Alisa's relief. After several months in the shelter, she believed their ordeal was over and moved out with the children. With the support of social services, Alisa secured a place to live, a car, and a job, and she began the process of filing for divorce. Convinced that Trevor was out of her life for good, she felt optimism about the future. Encouraged by her newfound freedom, she even started exploring online dating and meeting new people. However, Alisa was wrong in her assumptions. After the divorce was finalized and custody arrangements were settled, she had to meet Trevor twice a week to exchange the children. These meetings were filled with noticeable tension, but no further aggressive outbursts occurred. By January 2017, Trevor seemed to have accepted the situation. A month later, he called Alisa, claiming there were some divorce-related documents she needed to sign. Trusting his recent calm demeanor, Alisa went to Trevor's house without any suspicion. At that time, Trevor's life was falling apart. He was facing possible imprisonment due to fraud allegations, and the image he had carefully crafted as a successful businessman and devoted family man also was crumbling. When Alisa arrived, Trevor tried to provoke her into a conversation, accusing her once again of infidelity and demanding a confession. In reality, there were no documents for her to sign. This was merely a ruse to draw her into a confrontation. When she attempted to leave, Trevor grabbed a machete, pressed it against her chest, and then held it to her throat. He kept her in this terrifying situation for several hours. Alisa eventually managed to calm him down and convinced him to let her go by promising not to call the police. Despite her promise, Alisa contacted emergency services as soon as she left. When the police arrived, Trevor denied everything, claiming she was lying and even threatened her life. Since there were no visible injuries on Alisa, the police believed his version of events. Following this incident, both Alisa and Trevor filed restraining orders against each other. Trevor began to take advantage of the situation to make the kids believe him, telling them that she was trying to send him to prison and take away his time with them. Trevor continued to build his narrative, blaming Alisa for the family's breakup. He told the children that he planned to reunite with them, and they eagerly believed him. The children were unaware of Alisa's living situation or the danger Trevor posed to her, as he had never directed his abuse at the children. This ignorance allowed Trevor to keep his growing children unaware of the true situation and the danger he represented to Alisa. Arden was manipulated by Trevor into becoming his informant. She spied on her mother and reported back to him. On March 11, 2017, Arden followed Trevor's instructions and informed Trevor when her mother went to bed with the younger children. She also left a window open for him. That night, Trevor arrived at Elisa's house with Landon, who stayed in the car, while leaving his 3-year-old son, Cooper, home alone, asleep in bed. He broke into the house, attacked Elisa, and took her phone to prevent her from contacting the authorities. He then dragged her into the living room, where the children ran out to check on their mother. Trevor ordered the children to return to their rooms and stay there until he allowed them to come out. Meanwhile, Arden remained in Trevor's car, watching over Landon. She believed that her parents were calmly talking and working out their problems, and that they would soon come out so they could all return to their dad's house and be a happy family again, just like before. But that outcome never came to pass. Around 4 a.m., Trevor sent his daughter a message saying the plan had changed. He instructed her to enter the house. When Arden came inside, Elisa saw her daughter and painfully realized that her daughter had sided with Trevor. Trevor then told Arden to take the other children to the car and drive them to his home. He assured her he would return later with Elisa in her car after resolving their reconciliation issues. The girl Arden trusted her father and agreed to help. While the inexperienced teenager desperately tried not to get into an accident on the road, Trevor tied his ex-wife to the bed. Over the next few hours, Trevor made wild claims about having millions of dollars in offshore accounts, preparing a yacht, and planning to escape into international waters. During this time, he repeatedly assaulted Elisa, using a weapon to intimidate her. He also forced her to take sedative medication, causing her to periodically fall asleep during the abuse and making it impossible for her to resist. At one point, Trevor used Elisa's phone to record a video in which he described his plan, in which he said, "I'm here with Elisa at her house, which I'm not allowed to be in. I woke Elisa up and held her against her will." Around 6 a.m., he tried to suffocate her by placing a pillow over her face and sitting on it. Desperate to survive, Elisa agreed to whatever he demanded, including going with him to the yacht and fleeing into international waters. Trevor eventually decided to leave, taking Elisa with him. She did not resist because she understood that Trevor was not in control of himself in these moments and was extremely dangerous. It was clearly a matter of life and death. They got into the car and started driving. About an hour later, Trevor parked near a supermarket on the outskirts of town to buy some supplies. While he was getting out of the car, Elisa managed to jump out, screaming for help. She ran toward a young man working at the supermarket, who had just stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Before she could reach him, another man, large, muscular, and leaving the store with his shopping bags, grabbed her. He twisted her arms behind her back and forced her back into the car. That man is Trevor, then got into the driver's seat and drove away. The supermarket employee, alarmed by what he had witnessed and suspecting a kidnapping, called 911. He provided authorities with the car's make, color, and license plate number. The car was quickly identified as that of Trevor Summers. A man had recently gone through a contentious divorce. Investigators quickly looked into Trevor and realized Elisa had previously filed several domestic violence complaints against him. This information painted a deeply troubling picture. Suspecting foul play, detectives decided to visit Elisa's home, where she lived with her children. However, when they arrived, the house was empty. The children were eventually found at Trevor's house, being cared for by Arden. When asked about their parents' whereabouts, none of the children could provide an answer. It became increasingly evident that Elisa had been kidnapped and was in grave danger. Understanding the sensitivity of the situation, the police opted to speak carefully with the children to avoid alarming them. Both parents' phones were turned off and untraceable, leaving the police with no immediate leads. Instead of scaring the children with suggestions that their mother may have been abducted by their father, officers gently questioned them to assess the situation. As the children described their parents' relationship, the police were shocked, especially considering the young ages of the witnesses. All the children recounted incidents of Trevor abusing Elisa. Though the children themselves were never physically harmed, they recalled seeing their mother tied up by Trevor, with her hands and feet bound for hours. That evening, Arden unintentionally helped him with his plans. While on the phone with her father, Trevor convinced Arden that he wanted to reconcile with Elisa and repair their relationship. He instructed Arden to leave a window open after everyone in the house had gone to bed, claiming it was part of a plan to surprise Elisa. Trusting her father's intentions, the naive girl complied. This gave Trevor access to the house, and without realizing his true motives, Arden unknowingly became complicit in his scheme. During the night, while the rest of the family was asleep, Trevor entered the bedroom where his ex-wife Elisa was sleeping. Her 7-year-old daughter, Bryn, and 5-year-old son, Grady, were also in the room. Elisa woke up to something wet dripping on her face and, still disoriented, sensed a threatening presence. Standing over her was Trevor, pressing a damp cloth against her face. Overcome with fear, Elisa screamed and struggled. At first, she couldn't identify who it was, but she soon realized it was Trevor. Frantically, she threw objects from her bedside table at him in an attempt to defend herself. However, Trevor grabbed her by the ankles, dragged her out of bed, and onto the floor. Her loud screams woke the children, who instinctively realized their father was attacking their mother. They cried and pleaded with him not to harm her. Trevor then dragged Elisa into another room, warning the children to stay out. What exactly happened to Elisa in that room remained a mystery to the children. Hours later, Arden took the children and drove them to their father's house. The police were continuing their search for Trevor. Based on the children's statements, detectives reconstructed the events and used the information to initiate a detailed search for Trevor, attempting to predict his escape routes. However, what the children didn't know was that Trevor had access to a yacht and millions of dollars, giving him a possible advantage in evading authorities. Before that, when leaving the supermarket, Trevor drove Elisa along rural roads near the Tampa Bay coastline, stopping occasionally in isolated areas. Enraged by her escape attempt, he retaliated by slashing her wrists with a razor and yelling at her. Eventually, he took her to a small, abandoned town, where they stayed for more than a day. During this time, Elisa saw Trevor writing suicide notes addressed to his children and the police. He continued to assault her throughout the ordeal. Despite the horrors she endured, Elisa focused on thoughts of her children and remained determined to survive for their sake. On the morning of March 13, Trevor and Elisa arrived in Little Harbor, a resort area where they had frequently vacationed as a family. Elisa immediately saw this as a bad omen because the location held significant meaning for Trevor, and she feared it might be where he planned to end both of their lives. Trevor parked the SUV behind a dumpster, moved to the back seat, and wrapped a rope around Elisa's neck. For several moments, he strangled her, and Elisa felt she was on the verge of death. Suddenly, Trevor let go of the rope and moved to the driver's seat. He sped off down a dirt road toward the beach. Unbeknownst to Trevor, police vehicles were closing in from behind. Then, when he realized he couldn't escape, he stopped the SUV, took out the razor he had previously used to threaten Elisa, and began slashing his own throat. Elisa screamed in terror, pleading with him to stop. The police surrounded the vehicle, forcing Trevor to drop the blade. They quickly helped Elisa escape from the horrific scene. Despite her injuries, Elisa survived. Both she and Trevor were taken to the nearest hospital for treatment. Trevor's injuries were not life-threatening. Elisa later gave a detailed account of the abuse she had endured at Trevor's hands. However, even then, Trevor denied any wrongdoing. He claimed Elisa had gone with him willingly, asked to be tied up, and consented to the violence as part of her interest in extreme intimacy. This blatant lie was dismissed by everyone. Trevor faced 11 charges, including attempted murder, kidnapping, abuse assault, and endangering the lives of his children. He denied all accusations, which delayed the trial. Additional setbacks arose from bureaucratic issues. Thankfully, Trevor was denied bail and remained in custody, allowing Elisa and her children to feel safer. Trevor spent 5 years in detention before preliminary hearings began in 2022. Prosecutors argued that his actions were premeditated and that Elisa would have died if the police had not intervened in time. In contrast, his defense attorney claimed the events were a coincidence caused by the stress Trevor had been under due to his wife's behavior. The defense even argued that Elisa had asked to be kidnapped and treated roughly. However, the prosecution's case was strong, supported by overwhelming evidence that disproved Trevor's claims. This included a video Trevor had recorded himself, handwritten confessions, suicide notes, and testimony from a store employee Elisa had approached for help. Physical evidence, such as the pillow he used to smother her and the ropes used to restrain her. Consequently, the defense's version sounded completely unconvincing. Elisa testified in court against her ex-husband Trevor, declaring she was no longer afraid of him and was determined to see him sentenced to life in prison for the 55 hours of torment he had inflicted on her. Despite this, the case was far from over, and much depended on the eloquence of Elisa, the prosecutor, and Trevor's attorney. During several hours of questioning, Elisa provided detailed accounts of the abuse she suffered before the kidnapping, including acts of torture, physical violence, and threats. Her testimony appeared to deeply resonate with the jury. Following her statements, Trevor underwent cross-examination. His testimony lasted over an hour, but as he spoke, the prosecution seemed increasingly confident in their case. It became evident that their position was stronger. Despite this, Trevor's defense attorney continued to search for weaknesses in the prosecution's arguments, aiming to minimize Trevor's culpability. Much of the defense's questioning focused on the abuse allegations. The attorney tried to convince the jury that everything had been consensual, thereby attempting to undermine the prosecution's case. They also tried to portray Elisa as manipulative and deceitful, claiming she had intentionally pushed Trevor to his breaking point, triggering his aggression and subsequent actions. Elisa and Trevor's children are 13-year-old Bryn and 19-year-old Arden, also participated in the hearings. Bryn had vivid and clear memories of the night her father assaulted her mother. The children's fear was unmistakable, and it became increasingly apparent that Trevor could no longer evade justice. When asked about the wound on his neck, Trevor claimed it was the result of emotional distress, stemming from a stressful situation. The defense attorney emphasized that Trevor had no prior criminal record or history of violence. Nonetheless, the incident with Elisa severely undermined his credibility. The hearings lasted 3 days. In closing arguments, the defense attorney contended that the alleged kidnapping was merely Trevor's misguided attempt to reconcile with his wife, which had spiraled out of control. Elisa, however, firmly asserted that she had narrowly escaped being murdered and described Trevor as extremely dangerous. In a last-ditch effort, the defense questioned whether Elisa had been attacked in her home, pointing to the absence of blood, broken furniture, or other signs of a struggle. The claim that she had been tied up in a car in a supermarket parking lot was also contested. However, these arguments resembled the desperate attempts of a defense team that had become entangled in its own inconsistent versions of events. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours before reaching a verdict. Ultimately, they found Trevor guilty on all charges. For Elisa, justice was finally served. Overcome with emotion, she broke down in tears and fell into the arms of Jeff Matthewson, whom she had met shortly before the 2017 attack. Jeff had been a constant source of support throughout her ordeal. Alisa believed her ex-husband's aggression might have been fueled by his jealousy of Jeff, while others speculated that Trevor's actions stemmed from his despair over losing control of his life. In 2021, Alisa married Jeff, describing him as the person who made her feel truly safe for the first time. In later interviews, she spoke openly about the devastating impact Trevor had on her life and family, as well as the extreme and dangerous measures he had taken. Trevor's manipulative behavior, particularly involving their children, left lasting scars. Arden, one of their children, struggled to relearn how to trust others, a process made even harder by the cruelty they had witnessed from an early age. The court sentenced Trevor to life in a Florida state prison, along with an additional 224 years to be served consecutively, ensuring he will never be released. Despite this, Trevor remains determined to appeal the sentence and is actively pursuing that effort. Perry March was born in 1961 to Arthur March and Sephora. He and his wife, Janet, were complete opposites of each other. He is ordinary, but his wife was a very bright, beautiful woman, dreamy and talented. Janet grew up in a wealthy family, as the daughter of a well-known lawyer from Nashville. Janet and Perry met as students at the University of Michigan in the early 1980s and quickly became inseparable. When Perry graduated and moved to Chicago to work as a financial broker, Janet followed him without hesitation. However, she soon began to miss her home and family. To support Perry's education, her father agreed to pay for his expensive tuition at the prestigious Vanderbilt Law School. As a result, Janet and Perry returned to Nashville, and since Perry was hesitant, it was Janet who proposed to him in Percy Warner Park. They got married in 1987 and moved into a house in a well-known area of the city, which was rented and paid for by Janet's father. The following year, Perry graduated and chose to work for a local law firm in Nashville instead of accepting offers from large firms in New York. In 1990, Janet gave birth to a son named Samson, affectionately called Sammy. On the surface, this family seemed to have everything: a mother, a father, and a son. Unfortunately, this outward appearance of happiness was deceptive. In 1991, a scandal emerged at the law firm where Perry worked after a young female specialist received an inappropriate proposal from a colleague. A stranger sent her a letter expressing his attraction to her and his desire for an intimate relationship. Feeling embarrassed, the young woman reported the incident to her boss. After this, 2 more letters arrived, urging her to respond to the proposal by leaving a message in the firm's library. In response, the firm took measures to identify the sender of these inappropriate letters. They installed a CCTV camera in the library where she was supposed to leave her reply. When the man came to collect the letter, the firm's lawyers were shocked to discover that he was Perry March, the husband of Janet. Faced with evidence from the video, Perry refused to confess. The law firm gave him an ultimatum: resign or be fired. He chose to resign. This uncomfortable situation led to legal consequences, as the female employee who received the unwanted proposal sued Perry for financial compensation. He was ordered to pay her. To avoid a harassment claim, she requested $25,000, half of which Perry was to pay in monthly installments, while the remaining $12,500 was to be paid in a lump sum. This arrangement was made to keep his wife, Janet, from discovering the scandal. In 1994, Janet and Perry welcomed their second child, a lovely daughter named Sephora. As their family grew, they decided to build a larger home and purchased nearly 2 acres in the affluent suburb of Forest Hill. Over the next year, they worked on constructing their dream house, a $650,000 mansion designed in the French country style. Janet was very enthusiastic about the project and closely oversaw every stage of the construction. However, her demands were sometimes unreasonable, leading Perry to step in and help mediate between her and the construction team. Although the new house brought excitement, Janet and Perry's marriage was facing difficulties. Their relationship had been strained for several months, and they frequently attended therapy, both together and individually. At home, they rarely communicated. Perry was often away for at least 3 days a week, and their arguments escalated whenever he returned. A family therapist suggested they take a break from each other, but Janet was adamant about getting a divorce. In August 1996, a significant incident occurred that changed the course of Janet and Perry's relationship forever. Perry needed to pay the final installment to a woman at a law firm, but, due to financial issues, he sent her a letter requesting to postpone the payment until October. Unfortunately, Janet read the letter, which led to a heated argument between them. In the aftermath, Janet contacted her mother to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. On August 15, 1996, Janet was scheduled to meet with the lawyer but never arrived at the office because she mysteriously disappeared that night. Perry claimed that Janet left voluntarily after their argument. He told the police that she expressed a desire to get some space to think but did not specify where she was going. He said that at around 8:30 p.m., Janet packed a suitcase, took her passport and $1,500 in cash, and left in her car. He also mentioned that she left him a list of tasks to complete before her return. After she left, he informed friends and family of her departure as he normally would. The next morning, Deneen Beard, the maid, came to clean the house and was surprised to find everything in order. However, Perry asked her to focus on her work and not to go into the children's room. Then a nanny named Ella Goldschmidt, who had previously arranged with Janet that her son would play with Sammy, arrived. After Deneen left, Ella noticed Sammy jumping on an oriental rug that was rolled up on the floor next to the playroom. When she returned around 2 p.m. to pick up her son, the rug was no longer there. Initially, Janet's family believed Perry's explanation. Janet's father went to Nashville International Airport to check if Janet had left her car there. Janet's mother, Carolyn, became increasingly worried, as her daughter would not just vanish without a word and would never abandon her children. Although Carolyn wanted to contact the police, Perry convinced her to wait 12 days, claiming that Janet had said she would return by then. That evening, Perry called his father, Arthur, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel living in Jalisco, Mexico. Arthur readily agreed to travel to Nashville to support his son during this challenging time. In the meantime, Janet's family's concerns continued to escalate. With August 25th being Sammy's 6th birthday, fears grew that something had happened to Janet. She would definitely not miss such an important occasion. While Perry and Janet's parents told the party guests she had traveled to California to visit her brother and was postponing her return due to an ear infection, her sudden disappearance raised alarm among her loved ones. Days passed without any news from Janet, and the anxious waiting could not go on much longer. On August 29th, Janet's parents reported her missing to the police. Detective David Miller, a skilled investigator with extensive experience, was assigned to the case. He initiated the investigation by reaching out to hospitals and reviewing Janet's bank and credit card accounts, which had not been used since her disappearance, raising concerns about her well-being. On September 7th, authorities located Janet's car in a parking lot at an apartment complex about 5 miles from her home. The car appeared to have been parked there for several weeks. Inside, police discovered Janet's bag, which contained her documents, passport, credit cards, and $11 in cash. They also found a suitcase filled with clothes, notably absent of a bra, toothpaste, a comb, or underwear, which seemed unusual. Additional evidence included a pair of white sandals in the glove compartment and unusual, dirty bicycle tire tracks near the car. Investigators needed to analyze this evidence carefully. On September 10, 1996, Perry was questioned by investigators and consented to a search of his home. The police conducted the search over the weekend of September 14th to 15th while Perry was away in Chicago with his children. The house showed no signs of domestic violence or anything noteworthy. A few days later, the owner of a tire store contacted law enforcement to inform them that Perry had visited the store on August 21st, a week after Janet went missing. Perry inquired about purchasing a new set of tires, despite the good condition of those already on his car. When asked why he wanted a different brand, his response raised further suspicions. On September 18th, Perry decided to move to Chicago with his children. Before leaving, he had a concerning conversation with Janet's longtime friend, Diane Sachs, which she later reported to the police. Perry asked Diane if she thought he could kill his wife. Although she hesitated to answer, he proceeded to ask the disturbing question of what she would think if he had loaded Janet's body into his car and taken it to a remote location for disposal. This raised serious suspicions about him. As a result, the police launched a comprehensive search for Janet, involving divers, 2 helicopters with thermal scanners, specially trained dogs, police officers, and volunteers. Meanwhile, Perry hired a lawyer, who informed the police that Perry would not cooperate with the investigation. In November, as Janet's parents held a day of mourning for her, Perry chose not to attend, further increasing the police's suspicions about him. Over time, a theory about Janet's disappearance began to develop. It was suggested that Perry and Janet had a heated argument the night she disappeared. During this argument, Janet may have said something that provoked Perry, leading him to strike her hard. Given that Perry held a black belt in martial arts, a single blow could have killed her, or he might have strangled her. Whether intentional or not, when he found Janet dead at his feet, he was faced with a dire decision. Investigators believe that Perry hid Janet's body either in the basement, in the woods, or near their home. Furthermore, Ella had mentioned that there was a rolled-up rug that she had noticed in Perry's house that morning. Janet's body may have been inside that carpet, and tragically, little Sammy may have unknowingly played around his mother's body. Afterward, Perry moved her body to his Jeep and drove to a location where he buried it. He then drove Janet's car to where it was later discovered, taking her mountain bike with him so he could ride it back home. However, these are merely speculations, and the police were tasked with uncovering evidence of the murder, marking a new phase in the investigation. Janet's father, a prominent lawyer, was determined to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, Perry applied to become the manager of Janet's estate, but her parents opposed this and filed their own petition. Perry refused to consent. Ultimately, the court designated a guardian to oversee Janet's property and ordered Perry to return some items he had taken. He only returned them after being urged to do so. This was just the beginning of a legal dispute between Perry and Janet's parents. The battle continued until late 1999 when the court granted Janet's parents the right to visit their grandchildren. They traveled to Perry's new home in Illinois, eager to see the children, but were shocked to discover that he had moved to Mexico to be with his father. Moreover, just weeks after relocating, Perry married a local woman named Carmen Rojas. 3 years had passed since Janet went missing, and she still had not been officially declared dead. This prompted her parents to file a lawsuit against Perry for the manslaughter of their daughter. When Perry did not appear in court to contest the charges against him, the judge ordered him to pay $113.5 million in compensation to Janet's parents in May 2000. Janet's parents traveled back to Mexico to confront Perry and requested to meet his children. He firmly refused their request, prompting them to return to Nashville. A month later, they returned to Mexico with a court order and assistance from local police, who arrested Perry for violating his visa. Although the charges were eventually dropped, by the time Perry got back home, his children were missing. Taking advantage of Perry's absence, Janet's parents took the children to the U.S. and sought permanent custody once they were home. This led to a direct confrontation and sparked another legal battle for custody. Ultimately, Perry regained custody, and Janet's parents were reprimanded for unlawfully taking the children. Later, the Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned Perry's manslaughter conviction. At this point, Perry believed he could lead a stable life in Mexico with his new wife and children, feeling confident that nothing would disrupt his plans. However, unexpected developments were on the horizon, as the local police department, along with 2 investigators, continued to actively investigate Janet's case. In the latter half of 2004, the prosecutor's office introduced new evidence that led to a retrial, during which 59 witnesses were heard. This resulted in charges against Perry for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In October 2005, an arrest warrant and a request for extradition to the United States were issued for Perry. While being transported, Perry was accompanied by Pat Postiglione, one of the detectives involved in the investigation. During the journey, Perry was quite talkative and asked the detective whether he could face murder charges if an accident occurred. He also told Pat that he would be willing to confess everything if he could receive a sentence of no more than 7 years. The detective stated that he would pass this information on to the district attorney. Janet's parents were determined not to allow Perry to enjoy a new life after spending a short time in prison. They submitted a new petition for custody of the children, which the judge approved. Facing difficulties in the legal system, Perry sought another solution. He attempted to persuade his cellmate, Russell Ferris, to kill Janet's parents. Russell became interested in the plan and learned that Perry's father, Arthur, would act as the intermediary. After 2 months of discussions among the three, Russell's lawyer notified the police about Perry's offer to kill Janet's parents. From that point on, Perry's situation became increasingly complicated. Initially, the evidence against Perry for murder was weak and mostly circumstantial. His lawyer argued that there was no solid proof that Perry had committed the crime. If he had been found not guilty, he could not be tried again for the same offense. However, the situation changed dramatically with the discovery of a murder-for-hire plot involving Janet's parents. Now, the police had recorded conversations revealing details of the planned murder, including statements made by both Perry and his father, Arthur. When Arthur listened to the recordings, he realized his errors and agreed to testify against his son in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The disturbing truth emerged. Arthur, Perry's father, revealed that his son had confessed to him about killing Janet. A few weeks after the murder, Perry sought his father's help because he was anxious about the body being discovered. He asked Arthur to help hide it. One night, they drove to a location where, according to Arthur, the body was already decomposing and stored in a bag. Arthur recounted loading the remains into Perry's Jeep. They then traveled north to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they stayed at a motel. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur attempted to dispose of the body. He looked for a body of water deep enough to conceal the remains but was unable to find one before sunrise. Eventually, he located a suitable spot. Arthur later attempted to guide investigators to the location where he had hidden the body, but he couldn't specify the exact spot. However, both the police and the jury believed his account of the incident. According to Arthur, after Perry killed Janet, her body remained in their home for some time, wrapped in a rug. Unfortunately for Arthur, his confession did not yield the leniency he had hoped for, and he died just months later while incarcerated. Perry faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a 56-year prison sentence. He is currently incarcerated at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he assists fellow inmates with their legal appeals in the prison law library. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. Tragically, Janet's remains have never been found. Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziel Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziel Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Seabeal. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwyn. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwyn, near the main door, Cruz found Lewis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before crews arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as crews continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, crews immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwen's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwen might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, crews confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Malang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwen and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwen had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, though the rooms appeared ransacked. Only Gwen's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwen in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwen. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwen was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwen, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lovella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Louis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwyn's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwyn's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders. He had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine. The family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwyn's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwyn, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwyn and Lewis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwen almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. The Jacobson family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and a beautiful home in Wellington, Florida. They appeared to be the ideal loving family. However, appearances can be misleading. Behind the facade of their perfect life lay a much darker reality. What was meant to be a joyful birthday celebration for their two young boys turned into a devastating event, leading to a tragedy so profound that the entire nation would remember their names. To fully grasp this story, we need to go back to 1989 when Neil Jacobson met Frankie at a gym in Bayside, Queens, New York, where they both lived and worked. They are ambitious and successful in their careers. Frankie was making her mark at Lehman Brothers, a leading firm in finance, while Neil had established his own boutique firm on Long Island. They were young, driven, and aspiring to achieve the American dream. Those who knew them praised their relationship as one filled with deep admiration and affection. Frankie was entirely devoted to Neil. In turn, he was seen as a charismatic and kind man with immense potential. Within his family and social circles, he was often regarded as a golden boy, intelligent, charming, and seemingly unstoppable. Together, Neil and Frankie appeared to be the perfect couple. They soon took the next step in their relationship by getting married and moving into Neil's home in New Jersey. Transitioning into married life was easy for them. Together, they created a comfortable, rewarding life filled with shared interests and adventures. They did everything, enjoying activities like biking, scuba diving, and weekend trips to the countryside, which helped strengthen their bond. To an outside observer, their life seemed perfect. However, amidst their seemingly ideal marriage, they felt something was missing: children. They desperately wanted to start a family, but the path to parenthood was challenging. For years, they endured the painful reality of infertility, going through multiple fertility treatments that brought both hope and disappointment. Despite the emotional toll, they remained determined. Finally, in 2003, after many struggles, their dreams came true when they welcomed twin boys, Joshua and Eric. With their lives already comfortable, Frankie and Neil experienced happiness beyond what they had ever imagined. Their family felt complete, and they thrived both personally and professionally. Neil's parents, Harold and Goldie Jacobson, moved from New Jersey to Florida in 2000. Although they loved their new home, they missed being close to their son and his family. They often expressed their frustration about the distance and wished for more time with their grandchildren. In 2005, Harold was diagnosed with cancer, and his health deteriorated rapidly, making it impossible for him to travel to New Jersey. This situation was a turning point for Neil. Being far from his father during such a critical time was too much to bear. He decided to move his family to Florida to be closer to his parents. Before the move, Neil had already started investing in real estate in Florida. He bought a pre-construction condo in Lantana and then a second one shortly after. Real estate quickly became an obsession for him, leading to the purchase of a third condo. Despite recognizing that he was stretching himself financially, he was drawn in by the booming market. Frankie, however, was concerned about his investments and questioned their practicality. Nonetheless, Neil was resolute in his decision and was not willing to change his plans. With his properties piling up in Florida, Neil began pushing Frankie to relocate. She was resistant, hesitant to leave behind the life they had built in New Jersey. She loved their home, their community, and the stability they had created. But as time passed, the financial strain of maintaining their New Jersey home became overwhelming. Eventually, Frankie reluctantly agreed to the move. The Jacobsons officially settled in Florida, eager to start a new chapter close to family. However, things did not go as planned. Neil had hoped to sell their New Jersey home before the move, but the market wasn't in his favor. Just 2 months after they arrived in Florida, tragedy struck. Harold Jacobson passed away. The loss of his father devastated Neil in ways he hadn't expected. He had uprooted his entire life to be closer to Harold, only to lose him so soon after arriving. The grief weighed heavily on him, and his mother, Goldie, later revealed that Neil had struggled with his mental health from a young age. She recalled that as a teenager, he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, an issue that had plagued him for years. Doctors had noted that Neil had an overwhelming desire to be the perfect child, a pressure that followed him into adulthood. As the years passed, his struggles with anxiety only grew, and soon, things took an even darker turn. The Great Recession hit Florida hard, and Neil, who worked as a mortgage broker. The real estate market collapsed, and the once thriving business that had allowed him to invest so freely was now crumbling beneath him. The financial security he had worked so hard to build was slipping away. As the weight of his losses grew heavier, so did the cracks in his once stable world. The Florida condos he had invested in before relocating were quickly turning into a financial nightmare. Burdened with subprime mortgages, their payments increased month after month, stretching his resources thin. At first, Neil had convinced himself that things would turn around. He had always been a problem solver, always finding ways to make things work. But this time, no amount of determination could keep the walls from closing in. With little to no work coming in, and 4 separate mortgages draining their finances. At first, Neil and Frankie tried to hold on, dipping into their savings to stay afloat. But as time passed, their financial situation only worsened. Bills piled up, debt collectors began calling, and the stress of trying to keep everything together was pushing Neil to his limits. Desperate for a solution, he started making risky financial decisions, one bad choice after another, each one digging them deeper into a hole. He chased after risky investments, sought out loans, all in a futile attempt to stop the inevitable collapse. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much to bear. The financial juggling act had run its course. Frankie was exhausted and drained, made the painful decision to stop paying the mortgages on their 3 Florida condos. It was a move that felt like surrender, but they had no choice. There was simply no more money left to give. By the year 2008, the pressure of Neil's business failures had begun to take a serious toll on his health. At first, it started with minor complaints, aches and pains that he couldn't quite explain, but as time went on, his symptoms worsened. He became sluggish, struggling to muster the energy for even the most basic tasks. His body felt heavy, and his mind clouded. He experienced random bouts of dizziness that left him feeling unstable, and he found himself unable to focus the way he used to. Concerned, he visited the family doctor, who ordered a blood test. In October, the results were troubling. Neil had elevated hormone levels, but there was no immediate explanation for his decline. As the weeks passed, his condition only worsened. The once energetic and determined man was now lethargic, withdrawn, barely functioning. He was eventually diagnosed with depression and transient peripheral vertigo, a condition that further contributed to his constant dizziness. In an attempt to help him cope, his doctor prescribed Zoloft, a common antidepressant. Neil, desperate to feel better, took the medication as prescribed, hoping it would offer some relief. But instead of improving, his mental state deteriorated further. A few days after starting Zoloft, he was called back to the doctor's office, where they added a prescription for Xanax. It was meant to ease his anxiety, but his family and friends quickly noticed that something wasn't right. Instead of stabilizing his mood, the medication seemed to send him spiraling even further into darkness. His paranoia intensified, his emotions became more erratic, and Neil they had once known began to fade before their eyes. Neil's sister, Deborah, became deeply concerned about her brother's rapid decline. She confided in their mother, worried about what he was going through. According to Deborah, Neil had started experiencing terrifying hallucinations. He had grown increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone or something was out to get him. Frankie, his wife, was just as alarmed. She desperate for support as Neil's behavior became more and more disturbing. He had completely withdrawn from the world, he refused to go outside, stopped engaging with friends and family, and even neglected his own hygiene. There were days when he wouldn't even shower, lost in a haze of fear and depression. His paranoia took a terrifying turn when he became obsessed with the idea that the FBI was watching him. He was convinced that federal agents were surveilling him, gathering evidence to have him arrested. He would talk about it constantly, warning anyone who would listen that they were building a case against him. His delusions became more elaborate. He was certain that his phone was tapped, that his home was under surveillance, and that at any moment, the authorities would storm in, take him away. His mother saw the full extent of his paranoia. One of the last times she visited him, Neil pulled her aside, his voice shaking with fear. He told her he was in big trouble, insisting that the FBI was coming for him, that he had done something terrible, though he couldn't seem to explain exactly what. The fear in his eyes was real, raw, and overwhelming. As Neil's mind unraveled, January 23, 2010. The darkness he had been wrestling with for months finally took over, and what happened next would shock everyone who had ever known him. That morning, Neil stood before his wardrobe, fumbling with the top shelf, his hands shaking as he retrieved a loaded gun. His wife, Frankie, still groggy from sleep, watched in confusion, not yet realizing the horror that was unfolding before her. Neil, with the gun in hand, stepped out of the wardrobe, his face hardening into something almost unrecognizable. Frankie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. In an instant, panic took over. She leapt toward him, struggling desperately to wrest the weapon from his grasp. They tumbled to the floor, the fight becoming a chaotic blur of screams, desperation, and tears. In the midst of the struggle, Neil, in a violent frenzy, struck Frankie, knocking out her front tooth and slicing her finger. Despite the brutality of it all, Frankie didn't give up. She fought with all her strength, but Neil was too much, overpowering her in his disturbed state. With cold detachment, he stood, reloaded the gun, and turned the weapon on her. 2 shots rang out one after another, each striking her in the face, silencing her forever. But Neil's twisted path didn't end there, covered in Frankie's blood. He reloaded the gun and made his way to his son Eric's room. Eric, who had been lying on his stomach in peaceful sleep, was the next victim in the nightmare that Neil had somehow constructed in his mind. 2 bullets tore through Eric's body, but against all odds, the boy survived the first 2 shots. However, Neil was undeterred, his mind fixated on finishing what he had started. He grabbed a pillow and pressed it over Eric's face, ensuring his son wouldn't survive. 2 more shots, and Eric was gone. The house was eerily still now as Neil moved toward the next room, where his youngest son Joshua was sleeping. Joshua, blissfully unaware of the carnage around him, lay curled in his sheets. Neil's actions were methodical, almost as if he were following a script. He covered his son's face with a pillow, silencing him with 2 shots to the face. In a matter of moments, the vibrant lives of his family had been extinguished, with the blood of his wife and children staining his hands. Neil walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. He stood under the water, numb, as if washing away the sins he could no longer escape. When the shower ended, he dressed, swallowed a cocktail of Vicodin and Xanax, in a haze, left his home. As he drove, the pills began to take effect, making him groggy and disoriented. Less than a mile from his mother's house, Neil passed out behind the wheel, swerving off the road and coming to a stop in the grass. Neil had initially planned to kill his mother, next before taking his own life. But in his twisted state, something inside him held him back. He later told the police that when he was at home, standing in a living room, he thought about going to heaven to be with his father, but he couldn't leave his mother alone, so he planned to take her with him. Thankfully, he never made it to her house. When the police found him, Neil was disoriented, barely conscious, and gripping the gun beside him. As they approached, he muttered, "I killed my family," in a dazed and broken voice. The investigation raised many questions. Was Neil a victim of the side effects of his medications, or had he planned this horrific act all along? A suicide note found later suggested that Neil may have been preparing for this moment, leaving many to wonder whether he was driven by his medications or if he had, at some point, simply snapped. His attorney's defense centered around his mental state. They argued that he had been suffering from severe depression, anxiety, and paranoia, all of which have been worsened by the medications he was taking. They described Neil overwhelmed by financial ruin, haunted by the fear that the FBI was watching him, and convinced that there was no way out. His legal team insisted that he had not acted out of hatred or rage but had instead been driven to an unimaginable breaking point due to the side effects of his prescription drugs. To support their argument, the defense brought in medical experts who testified about the dangers of Zoloft and Xanax, the two medications Neil had been prescribed before the murders. These drugs, they explained, could cause extreme mood swings, hallucinations, and suicidal tendencies, especially when taken together in high doses. Neil's behavior before the killings, his paranoia, delusions, and refusal to leave the house, was presented as clear evidence that he had lost his grip on reality. His lawyers pushed the narrative that Neil had been a loving father and husband, a man who had never shown any signs of violence before, making it hard to believe that he had killed his family intentionally. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They painted Neil not as a victim of medication but as a desperate man who had methodically planned the murders. They argued that his financial troubles had reached a boiling point, and that instead of facing them, he had chosen to take his family's lives in an act of ultimate control. They pointed to the way he had executed the killings, retrieving his gun, reloading it multiple times, and ensuring that no one survived. To them, this was not the act of a man lost in a haze of confusion but one who had made a deliberate and calculated decision. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against Neil was the suicide note found in his home. The note indicated that he had thought through his actions and accepted what he was about to do. It wasn't the frantic scribblings of someone in the middle of a psychotic episode, it was organized, reflective in the prosecution's view, proof of premeditation. If he had truly been unaware of his actions, why would he have left behind such a message? The prosecution also called witnesses to testify about Neil's behavior leading up to the murders. His sister, Deborah, had noticed a dramatic shift in his personality. He had become increasingly paranoid. His wife, Frankie, had confided in Deborah that Neil was no longer the man she had married. He had stopped showering, refused to leave the house, and seemed trapped in his own mind. While the defense used these accounts to argue that Neil was suffering from a mental breakdown, the prosecution used them to show that there had been warning signs, signs that should have led Neil to seek professional help instead of resorting to murder. Neil's mother, Goldie, also played a heartbreaking role in the trial. She had been one of the last people to see him before the tragedy. She recalled how Neil had told her, "Mom, I love you, no matter what happens." The courtroom fell silent. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but in hindsight, it was clear he had been preparing for what he was about to do. Goldie, who had always seen her son as a kind and loving man. She struggled to reconcile the Neil she knew with the one on trial for murder. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to decide whether Neil Jacobson had truly been in a state of antidepressants-induced psychosis or if he had coldly and deliberately murdered his wife and children. The prosecution emphasized that Neil had made a series of conscious choices, loading his gun, aiming at his loved ones, and pulling the trigger multiple times. They argued that no matter what struggles he was facing, nothing justified what he had done. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to consider his mental state, to see him as a broken man who had been consumed by fear, paranoia, and desperation. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, while acknowledging the tragedy of the situation, made it clear that no level of financial distress or mental illness excused the murder of innocent children and a devoted wife. Neil Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. Neil Jacobson reached a plea deal with the state. He changed his plea from not guilty to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He stated that the reason was the family's mounting financial situation. Now, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Neil Jacobson answered to the judge in the Palm Beach County courtroom, admitting that he shot his wife, Frankie, and then shot their twin 7-year-old sons while they were asleep in their Wellington home back. During the family's turn to speak in court, Neil held his head down and never looked up. Even after the trial ended, many questions remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Neil had received different treatment? Were the medications to blame, or was he simply a man who refused to face his failures? No one could say for certain what had driven him to this point. However, what was undeniable was that a mother and 2 young boys had lost their lives in the most horrific way possible. Nothing could ever undo that. The seductive predators with their handsome looks and the promise of a sweet future are the devil incarnate. They make their prey willingly walk into their trap, believing they have found love. Just weeks after the secret wedding in Las Vegas, Cynthia was brutally murdered. Her body was found in the desert, her throat cut so deep that it was almost severed. What unfolded next was not just a story of murder, but a tragedy of gullibility, greed, and the dark side of sweet promises. On December 24, 1980, an Arizona police station received a report from Pinal County, near the Superstition Mountains. Witnesses had discovered the body of a young woman showing clear signs of violence. She was dressed casually, with no purse or identification, making immediate identification impossible. There was a deep wound on her leg. Her clothing was soaked in blood, and her neck was brutally slashed, covered in multiple stab wounds. The autopsy revealed that the woman's injuries were even more horrific than they first appeared. Several deep stab wounds had pierced her neck, severing her spine, nearly decapitating her. 4 additional stab wounds had broken 2 ribs and penetrated her heart. The most chilling detail was a faint pattern of bruises on her left temple and eyebrow. The forensic pathologist suspected these marks were made by the sole of a shoe. Matching impressions were later found at the crime scene, suggesting that the killer had pressed his foot against her head to pin her down while inflicting the fatal wounds. Beyond these devastating injuries, the woman's body bore evidence of a prolonged struggle. Bruises on her face and torso, abrasions on her knees, and defensive wounds on her hands. It was clear the murder had been intentional and vicious. Detectives initially assumed the perpetrator was someone the victim knew. But with her identity still unknown, the investigation stalled. However, that same day, the situation changed when the county police department received a call from Kathy Monkman, who reported that her older sister had gone missing the day before. The missing woman's name was Cynthia Estelle Monkman, also known as Cindy. Kathy explained that her sister had failed to show up for a Christmas party planned for December 23rd, something entirely out of character. Since Cynthia had helped organize the event, she hadn't called or sent any message to explain her absence, and all attempts to reach her had gone unanswered. Kathy initially hesitated to contact police, assuming her sister might have changed her plans. But the next morning, the two were scheduled to fly home together to Illinois for the holidays. Kathy left a note and a 7:30 a.m. flight ticket, still hoping Cynthia would appear. When the plane took off and the seat beside her remained empty, Kathy felt a wave of dread. Something was terribly wrong. Kathy provided police with her sister's description, which matched the unidentified woman found in the desert. The timeline also aligned perfectly. Cynthia had gone missing just 1 day before the body's discovery. Investigators soon learned that shortly before her death, Cynthia had married a man she'd met only a few months earlier. After comparing available evidence, authorities concluded that the body was that of Cynthia Estelle Monkman, 30, a fact later confirmed through dental records and positively identified by her sister. Cynthia was born on September 16, 1958, in Pensacola, Florida. She and Kathy, born just 2 years apart, were inseparable from childhood. Their father, John Alexander Jack Monkman, was a psychologist, while their mother, Dorothy June Monkman, became a full-time homemaker after the children were born. A third child, Isasson, arrived 2 years later. When Jack accepted a new position, the family moved to Champaign, Illinois, where they built a quiet, happy life. Until tragedy struck. Dorothy was diagnosed with breast cancer. She died 2 years later, leaving Jack a widower with 3 young children, aged 6, 4, and 2. It was a crushing loss. But with the help of relatives, he managed to raise his children with love and stability. As they grew up, Cynthia and Kathy remained remarkably close. They attended college together, shared friends, and often took spontaneous road trips across the country to visit old acquaintances. In 1982, Kathy moved to Arizona to attend nursing school. She earned a master's degree in public health and built a promising career as a nutritionist. By 1983, at just 25, she was offered a leadership position at a major health center in Minnesota, a major step forward professionally. However, life far from her sister and family soon left her feeling isolated. By 1986, Cynthia decided to move back to Arizona, settling into an apartment not far from Kathy's home. Cynthia was a vibrant and attractive woman, always the center of attention wherever she went. She had many admirers, drawn to her charisma, confidence. Within the first month of moving back to Arizona, she met Mark, a local radio DJ and small-town celebrity. They quickly began dating. Their relationship was lively and passionate. They shared adventures, parties, but it was also tumultuous. Mark wanted to keep his carefree, party-fueled lifestyle, while Cynthia was ready to settle down, think seriously about starting a family. By July, 29-year-old Cynthia realized that their goals no longer aligned. She suggested they break up. The separation hit her hard. She struggled to cope with the emotional void that followed. To lift her spirits, she and her sister Kathy took a short beach trip to California. Despite their breakup, Cynthia and Mark still had lingering feelings for each other. Then, on the night of October 8, 1988, everything changed. At a lively local nightclub, Cynthia met 2 brothers, Michael Apelt and Rudy Apelt, tall, handsome newcomers from Germany. Cynthia felt an immediate connection with Michael. Kathy quickly noticed that Cynthia was completely smitten. Michael, 5 years younger than Cynthia and the youngest of 7 siblings, spoke broken English, which made communication clumsy at first. Yet Cynthia insisted that they understood each other without words. Cynthia couldn't stop talking about him. Over breakfast, she told Kathy that Michael had already mentioned marriage. More than once. Kathy was skeptical, thinking it was too soon and possibly just infatuation. But Cynthia brushed off her sister's concern, saying it was just what she needed to forget about her failed relationship with Mark. Their mutual friend, Annette Clay, who had been with them that night, began seeing Rudy, and the 2 couples soon became inseparable, going on double dates, spending nearly every day together. Within a week, everything accelerated. Rudy moved in with Annette, and Michael moved in with Cynthia. The pace stunned Kathy, who worried that her sister's impulsive decisions would lead to trouble. The whirlwind romance continued through the fall. On December 17, Cynthia and Michael attended a friend's wedding together. Kathy noticed a gold band on her sister's finger and asked about it. To her shock, Cynthia admitted she had already married Michael. On October 28, just 3 weeks after they'd met, it was the first time Cynthia had ever kept such a secret from her sister. Now, only 2 months later, detectives were staring at her lifeless body. They analyzed the limited evidence collected at the desert crime scene: deer tracks, a length of nylon cord, and a blood-soaked beach towel. It was obvious that Cynthia had been deliberately driven to that isolated location to be killed and left behind. The murderer likely assumed the desert would hide the crime forever. But fate intervened when her body was discovered by chance. After learning the details of Cynthia's recent life, detectives focused on 2 possible suspects: her new husband, Michael, or her ex-boyfriend, Mark. The savagery of the attack suggested a deeply personal motive: rage, jealousy, or betrayal. Investigators soon uncovered more unsettling information. A few weeks before her death, one of Mark's former girlfriends had been found dead under suspicious circumstances. That case was still under review by the state's Supreme Court. Cynthia and Mark had spoken just 3 days before her murder. During the call, an argument broke out when Cynthia revealed she had married someone else. Although she managed to calm him down, Mark reportedly told her he would be in town for Christmas and wanted to meet her. When Cynthia failed to show up at the pre-Christmas party and didn't answer any calls, her loved ones grew worried. The next morning, Michael phoned Kathy, shouting frantically into the receiver, demanding to know where his wife was. He sounded intoxicated. Kathy, alarmed by his tone, tried to piece together what had happened, when he had last seen Cynthia, and whether she might have met Mark after all. For a brief moment, Kathy even wondered if her sister had run away with her ex. Kathy went to Cynthia's apartment, hoping to find some clue about her sister's disappearance. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No message. No hint of where she had gone. Cynthia's photo was now everywhere. On TV, in newspapers, plastered across Arizona. Her family was devastated. Then, just days later, they received a letter that Cynthia had mailed before her death. The timing made it chilling to read. In the letter, she wrote warmly about her new marriage and expressed a wish for everyone to meet and get to know each other better. She seemed hopeful, unaware of the tragedy to come. Because of the language barrier, her relatives had never really been able to communicate properly with Michael. That same day, as Cynthia's family learned the awful news, a detective fluent in German was sent to speak with Michael. Though relatively inexperienced with murder investigations, he was chosen because of his language skills. The decision proved useful. Michael opened up quickly, relieved to finally speak with someone he could fully understand. The detective focused on reconstructing the couple's final hours on December 23, 1988. The day everything went wrong. Michael appeared tense from the start, but he managed to recount his version of events. He claimed that earlier that day, he and Cynthia had taken her car to a dealership for maintenance and rented another vehicle to get home. According to him, Cynthia spent the afternoon preparing for a trip and told him she planned to meet some friends around 10 o'clock p.m. Michael said that around 7 o'clock p.m., while he was showering, he overheard Cynthia having a heated phone conversation. Her voice sounded emotional, angry, even, but he couldn't understand the words or identify who she was speaking to. Moments later, she shouted something about needing to take care of an issue, grabbed her purse and luggage, and left without explanation. By the time Michael got out of the shower, she was gone. He cooperated fully with detectives, allowing them to search the apartment and car. He even presented a restaurant receipt from that same evening, December 23, as proof of his whereabouts. When police checked the couple's answering machine, one message stood out. At 10 o'clock a.m., Mark had called, saying he'd seen a news report about a missing woman who looked like Cynthia. He sounded alarmed and asked for someone to call back. But detectives found his timing suspicious. News of Cynthia's disappearance had barely begun circulating, making it unlikely he could have seen the story so early. To investigators, it almost sounded like he was trying to get ahead of the story and distance himself from suspicion. Ironically, because of his limited English, Michael didn't even realize yet that his wife was dead. When police brought him, Rudy, and Annette in for questioning. All three appeared distraught. Michael broke down in tears, screaming and demanding to know what had happened to Cynthia. But soon after, the group was separated for individual interrogations. Investigators collected shoe prints, hair, and blood samples from each of them, while also verifying their alibis. Everything checked out. They were released shortly after. For now, suspicion shifted back to Mark, whose behavior was beginning to seem erratic. The lead investigator flew to California to interview Mark in person. Meanwhile, Cynthia's phone continued to receive multiple calls, each one from Mark, leaving message after message on her answering machine, as if he were desperately trying to reach her. But when the detective reviewed his movements, Mark's alibi held up. He had worked his full shift at the radio station that day, then rented a car and driven to Los Angeles to spend Christmas with his mother and sister. It was confirmed he couldn't have been in Arizona when Cynthia was killed. Cynthia's funeral was held on December 31, 1988. When Michael was invited to speak, he stepped to the podium, but couldn't say a single word. He broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, until Rudy led him away. The mourners took this as a sign of deep grief. But afterward, as everyone drove away from the cemetery, Kathy happened to pass the brothers' car. To her shock, she saw Michael and Rudy laughing and joking with Annette. The sight froze her. Just hours earlier, Michael had collapsed in tears over his wife's coffin. Now he was smiling as if nothing had happened. In that moment, Kathy's instincts told her something was terribly wrong. Michael's grief, she realized, might have been nothing more than an act. Kathy shared her growing doubts about Michael with the detectives. Her words made them pause. Something in the case didn't fit together neatly, and now law enforcement decided to re-interview everyone involved. The first person they called in was Kathy herself. This time, she provided a fuller account of the whirlwind romance that had unfolded before the murder. To the investigators, the German brothers, Michael and Rudy, now appeared increasingly suspicious. They were evasive about nearly everything: their work, their finances, even their pasts. Whenever asked for details, they dodged the questions or changed the subject. Kathy recalled that only a few days after meeting them, she spotted the brothers entering one of the cheapest motels in town. This was odd, considering they had boasted about staying at a luxurious resort and working in high-level banking. That same night, she realized $100 was missing from her purse. At the time, she convinced herself it must have been a coincidence. But now, she wasn't so sure. The brothers' appearance had always been flashy, designed to project the image of wealth. But beneath the surface, their stories were full of cracks. Within weeks, they spun a new tale. They had supposedly been fired from the bank and were waiting for their next big opportunity. In the meantime, they guilted the women into letting them stay in their apartments. Kathy could see how easily her sister had been drawn into their charm, though she now recognized how manipulative it all seemed in hindsight. Another strange detail was Cynthia's sudden, secret marriage. Just a week after moving in, Michael told her he was facing deportation and could only stay in the U.S. if they married immediately. Under pressure and blinded by affection, Cynthia agreed. The two were secretly married in Las Vegas on October 28, only 3 weeks after meeting. The rushed wedding now painted a far darker picture, one of coercion and exploitation rather than love. Detectives began digging into the brothers' background. They soon discovered that Cynthia was far from the first woman to fall for their act. Since arriving from Germany, the brothers had courted several women and proposed to more than one. What had seemed like a whirlwind romance between Cynthia and Michael now appeared to be part of a troubling pattern. When police found Cynthia's diary, the last entry, dated November 11, read like a woman trying to convince herself that her husband truly loved her. It was painfully clear she had doubts. Despite this, not direct evidence yet tied Michael, Rudy, or anyone else from Cynthia's circle to the murder. Detectives examined a car rented on the day of her death. but its tire tread didn't match the prints found in the desert. Forensic tests on the brothers' own car also came up empty. Then, on January 3, Michael unexpectedly reached out to the German-speaking detective. He claimed that after returning home from Cynthia's funeral, he had found a strange message on his answering machine. It sounded like a threat, but he couldn't fully understand it. He asked the detective to translate. The next day, January 4, Michael came to the station with the recording. The message was chilling. The caller threatened to kill Michael and his loved ones if certain unspecified items weren't delivered. The voice even claimed responsibility for slashing Cynthia's throat. But something about it immediately struck detectives as odd. The voice sounded unnatural, as if the person were reading from a script. The phrasing was awkward, the pronunciation off, when translated literally into German. However, the message suddenly made perfect sense, almost as if it had originally been written in German and then clumsily translated into English. The officers pretended to take the message seriously, but in reality, it only deepened their suspicions. The list of likely culprits was narrowing fast. Michael, Rudy, and Annette were now squarely in their sights. Police placed the group under 24-hour surveillance. On the evening of January 5, officers stationed near their apartment observed movement inside around 5:30 p.m. Then, at 8:30 p.m., an undercover agent knocked on their door, pretending to have the wrong address. His true goal was simply to confirm who was inside. Moments later, after the visit, Michael called the police in a panic. He claimed that 2 black men had come to his door and threatened him. It was an obvious fabrication, but the officers played along. Instead of confronting him, they invited him and his companions to the station the next day to help create composite sketches of these supposedly threatening men. Michael was interrogated for several hours while the rest of his group interrogated in separate rooms. The detectives deliberately dragged out the interrogation, cleverly introducing details about Cynthia's case and carefully watching for cracks in their composure, waiting for the first sign that someone's resolve was about to break. It was Annette who gave in first. Though she resisted confessing for a long time, her confidence began to crumble when one of the detectives placed crime scene photos of Cynthia's mutilated body in front of her. Under mounting pressure, detectives threatened Annette with murder charges if she continued to hide the truth. Cornered, she finally confessed. Annette said both Michael and Rudy were seeking permanent residency in the United States. Since they spoke little English, Annette had served as their translator and intermediary. Together, they had invented several identities, claiming at times to be surfboard manufacturers, and at others, importers of luxury German cars. That was how they had first presented themselves when they met Cynthia. In reality, the brothers had been living for months in a cheap Arizona motel, surviving off the money and generosity of women they seduced. They used their looks and voices to manipulate and extort money from those who have fallen for them. Annette did not admit to knowing about the murder plot, nor did she say it had been premeditated. But her statements revealed that her friendship with Cynthia had been based solely on financial gain. After moving in with Cynthia and marrying her, Michael continued to spend recklessly while Cynthia worked 2 jobs to support them both. He told her their bank accounts in Germany were temporarily frozen, promising that once the funds were released, they would live comfortably. Between October and December, Michael drained more than $4,000 from her savings. Then Michael started to get interested in an easy, luxurious life, and wanted more. It was then that he devised a plan for fast money. On November 7, 1988, Michael convinced his wife to contact an insurance agent so they could take out matching life insurance policies for $1 million each. Naturally, Michael was listed as the primary beneficiary of Cynthia's policy. He continued to feed her lies about his frozen assets, claiming that the life insurance was simply a smart precaution until their fortune in Germany became available. Cynthia, deeply in love and trusting, agreed without hesitation. The agent approved the policies, but the amount was reduced to $400,000. Cynthia immediately wrote the check, unaware she was signing her own death warrant. From that moment, Michael and Rudy began planning how they would spend the payout. They even drew up a purchase and sale agreement for 2 Jaguar cars, worth $144,000 each, and 2 Toyota cars, each worth $66,000. They were also looking for expensive items, fully aware that in order to obtain all this luxury, they would have to kill. The policy officially went into effect one day before Cynthia's death, and the coverage amount was later increased to $800,000. By then, the brothers had already rented a car, the same one they would use to lure Cynthia to the desert and kill her. According to Annette's statement, on the day of the murder, Michael and Rudy drove Cynthia out to the desert under the pretense of a short trip. Once there, they coaxed her out of the car and attacked her. Annette remained inside the vehicle, too terrified to intervene. The assault lasted roughly 5 minutes. When the brothers returned, they were covered in blood from head to toe. Calmly, they changed clothes, washed off the blood to avoid staining the rental car, and disposed of all evidence. That night, they went to a luxury restaurant to celebrate what they believed was a perfect crime, a murder that would soon make them rich. But their plan quickly began to unravel. Cynthia's body was discovered within hours, and the brothers' illusion of control crumbled almost instantly. Detectives soon began digging deeper into their background. Through cooperation with German authorities, they learned that Michael had no bank accounts, Neustadt, and no business ventures in Germany. His life there had been far from glamorous. He was a manual laborer with a criminal record for burglary and assault. His brother, Rudy, had also served time in prison for physical abuse. Given their criminal histories, police investigated possible links to other crimes in the United States, but none were found. It appeared that Cynthia was their first and only murder victim, yet one question still puzzled investigators. Why didn't the tire tracks at the crime scene match the rental car the brothers had used? The answer came later. Michael had anticipated that very issue. On the night of the murder, he deliberately drove in a way that damaged the tire tread. When they returned the car, the rental company had to replace all 4 tires, effectively erasing one of the most crucial pieces of physical evidence. The owner of the rental car helped police confirm the truth of the story. After Cynthia's funeral, to create the illusion of outside threats, Michael and Rudy had hired a random homeless man from the streets of Los Angeles. They paid him to call a specific phone number and read a scripted message filled with menacing words. Annette was granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for testifying against Michael and Rudy, an offer she quickly accepted. During a detailed search of the apartment shared by Michael and Cynthia, investigators discovered a pair of shoes whose soles matched the footprints found at the crime scene, confirming the brothers' involvement. Later, during the suspect's imprisonment, several handwritten notes containing incriminating information were also uncovered and used as evidence against them. During the trial, Michael made the reckless decision to testify in his own defense. Despite his lawyer's efforts to dissuade him, he insisted on speaking, believing himself more intelligent than everyone else. That arrogance became his downfall, as his statements were full of contradictions that only strengthened the jury's certainty of his guilt. Michael and Rudy desperately tried to shift the blame onto Annette, but their attempt failed. On August 10, 1990, the jury found Michael Apelt and Rudy Alfred Apelt guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing both brothers to death. However, in 2009, Rudy's death sentence was overturned after an IQ test determined that he was mentally disabled. Under federal law, people with mental disorders could not be sentenced to death. As they often didn't understand the gravity of their actions, Rudy's sentence was commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Michael's sentence, however, has remained unchanged, his legal team deliberately delaying appeals to postpone execution. Michael remains on death row to this day. The Supreme Court actually upheld his death sentence in 2019, on April 26, 2022. At the age of 62, Rudy Appelt died in prison at the Abrazo West campus. Cynthia's death left an unhealing wound on her family. The loss was so devastating that her sister Kathy struggled to trust men, or people in general, for decades, not marrying until she was 50. The murder of Cynthia Monkman was not a crime of passion but a calculated act of greed, committed by sociopaths who saw human life as nothing more than a tool to achieve material gain. Ironically, insurance companies, in their relentless pursuit of profit through high-value policies, had unknowingly given the killers a motive. That night, in the $3.5 million oceanfront villa, Robert and Wendy Spoor had just wished each other good night after a warm day spent with their children and grandchildren. Just an hour later, gunshots tore through the night. When police arrived, Robert was dead on the sofa, shot through the head. Wendy lay dying in the bathroom, shot twice in the temple. Despite heavy blood loss and labored breathing, she managed to call 911. There was no sign of forced entry or warning at the scene. The white-masked killer had patiently lurked in the shadows of their home for hours, then left as if he had never been there. 2 years later, the truth was revealed. The killer was none other than their son-in-law, former baseball player Daniel Serafini, and his secret lover. It was a cold, calculated assassination, hidden behind the facade of a seemingly perfect family. In 2021, Robert Gary Spoor, 70, and his wife Wendy Wood, 68, lived in Lake Tahoe, California. They owned a spacious, cozy lakeside home worth $3.5 million. Married for 45 years. They had 2 daughters, Adrian and Erin, both with families of their own. Despite living separately, the parents stayed very close to their children and loved spending time with their grandchildren. On June 5, 2021, Erin visited with her 2 sons. They spent most of that day together. At 7:35 p.m., Erin picked up the children and left. After seeing their daughter and grandchildren off, Robert and Wendy entered the house, got ready for bed, went upstairs and watched TV. They had no idea their peaceful evening was about to be shattered. Around 8:30 p.m., a call came into 911, but the caller couldn't speak clearly, only making faint, gurgling sounds. Alarmed, the dispatcher immediately sent police and paramedics. Police arrived first. On the second floor, they found Robert lying on the couch near the fireplace, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. His position suggested he was taken by surprise and didn't have time to react. Wendy was found nearby in the bathroom. She had been shot twice in the head but was still alive, and she had been the one to call 911. In critical condition, she could only say her name before losing consciousness. She was rushed to a local hospital with a grim prognosis. As paramedics fought to save Wendy, detectives began processing the scene. They recovered 6 spent .22 caliber shell casings, later confirming the weapon was a pistol. Investigators then searched the surrounding area. They obtained footage from security cameras near the lake, where a popular bike path and a highway run nearby. In the footage, a lone figure appears at 5:30 p.m., about 3 hours before the 911 call, walking along the bike path toward Robert's house. This person immediately drew attention, partly because no one else was outside at that time, and partly due to the unusual outfit, a black hoodie pulled up to cover the face, and the lower half of the face covered with white tape or a mask. The individual walked cautiously, looking around, then paused to watch the house before breaking into a run and moving in a crouch toward the property. He appeared to enter the home and remain inside for hours, not emerging until after Erin and her children left. Shortly after the 911 call, the same figure ran out of the house and disappeared. The footage suggested the suspect was male, but no identity could be determined. Police held a press conference, released the video, and asked the public for leads. No other nearby homes had reported break-ins or assaults, implying Robert and Wendy were specifically targeted. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting the shooter knew them and was let in or had a key. Detectives began investigating Robert and Wendy's backgrounds to look for a motive. They have lived in the lake house for about 20 years. They met in college and remained inseparable. Besides raising their 2 daughters, they worked together in real estate and loved to travel. They had lived in Hong Kong before settling in California in 2000, a move that was deliberate and carefully chosen. Wendy grew up in a nearby suburb and always dreamed of living by Lake Tahoe, a picturesque place. That dream turned into a nightmare. Wendy barely survived the attack and was placed in intensive care with a severe head injury. She miraculously lived but had to relearn how to speak and even how to hold a spoon. Police guarded her closely, worried the attacker might return to silence a key witness. They also hoped she would recover enough to describe what she saw. At first, this wasn't possible due to her condition. So, investigators searched for clues on their own. With almost no physical evidence left behind by the killer, detectives examined Robert and Wendy's lives and relationships, looking for a motive. Especially in their business dealings, Robert and Wendy were wealthy, which could have drawn envy or hostility. But investigators found no threats, stalking, or hostile messages. Their daughter and others close to them had never heard of anything unusual. What seemed like a key lead eventually led to a dead end. Still, some things were noted. Robert was not always pleasant. He was sometimes rude, especially when it came to property and personal space. By November 2021, police had searched the homes of all family members, including Robert's, but found nothing useful. The murder weapon was never located, and no gun matched the shell casings from the scene. Despite ongoing efforts, the case stalled for 8 months. During that time, Wendy recovered enough to speak with detectives, but her information was less helpful than hoped. In February 2022, things shifted. Early that month, Adrian held a press conference at her home. She couldn't sit still and was extremely worried about her mother, Wendy. She believes that solving the case might help her mother overcome the loss of her husband. At the press conference, she repeated what law enforcement had already learned and, at the end, offered a $150,000 reward for information leading to the identification of the person caught on camera. By then, Wendy could speak fully and had largely recovered physically, though she remained emotionally devastated. Unfortunately, her account did not advance the case. She said the attack happened while she was dozing. After the first shot to her head, she instinctively ran to the bathroom without seeing the shooter. A second shot knocked her unconscious and left her blind. Wendy later woke to her dog, licking her face. The attacker was gone. All she could do was call 911. She spent 6 weeks in intensive care, followed by a long rehabilitation. Even afterward, she remembered nothing more. She now understood she was in danger, fearing the attacker might return at any time. The uncertainty weighed heavily. She had no idea who would target her and her husband. Investigators hoped her memory would eventually return and yield crucial clues, but instead, a year after the attack, Wendy passed away. According to Aaron, she could not bear the loss of her beloved husband, Robert. Afterward, Aaron and Adrian moved into a house on the lake. They inherited their parents' property and continued to seek justice, but without success. For nearly 2 years, the investigation remained stalled. Only on April 21, 2023, did the county sheriff's office release new public details. Even then, the suspect had not been caught. Authorities were just beginning to develop the most important leads in the case. On June 5, 2023, Adrian went to the police, accusing Aaron and her husband, Danielle Serafini, of being responsible for her parents' deaths. Aaron was married to Daniel, a former Major League Baseball player who later played in Mexico. His career had been successful, but he had begun to encounter problems. In 2013, Daniel retired from professional baseball. Afterward, he founded a baseball academy and owned a bar called the Oak Tavern. He and his wife, Erin, ran a business together, following the example of her parents, Robert and Wendy. After that, Adrian filed a lawsuit against Erin and Daniel, alleging that they had manipulated Wendy into harming herself following a failed assassination attempt. Before her death, Wendy disinherited Erin. Adrian believes their motive is money. To seize $23 million in real estate, she believed Erin tried to persuade Wendy to make her the sole heir. Adrienne, however, wanted to restore the original agreement her parents had signed, which split the inheritance equally between the sisters. In the end, Erin did not receive any inheritance from her parents. Adrienne, despite having a boyfriend who had been convicted of robbery, received everything. Adrian's boyfriend had an alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect. Detectives investigated Adrian's accusations, but the results were not what she expected. 4 months later, on October 20, 2023, it was not Erin who was arrested, but 49-year-old Daniel and 33-year-old Samantha Scott. Samantha was already known to Robert, Wendy, and the rest of the family. Investigators alleged that Daniel targeted Robert and Wendy's wealth and began removing anyone who stood in his way. His in-laws were the first victims, beyond murder and attempted murder charges. Daniel was also charged with child abuse and child endangerment for allegedly ambushing his sons at a relative's home before opening fire. He was arrested in Winnemucca, Nevada, and Samantha was later apprehended in Las Vegas. Adrian is shocked by the cruelty of Daniel, who her parents treat like their own son. Erin, however, remained skeptical and insisted Daniel was innocent, calling the accusations lies. The sisters agreed on only one point. Neither expected Samantha to be involved. Daniel was known not only for his pitching career but also for a steroid scandal in 2008. That incident marked the beginning of his decline in professional sports. His contract was terminated, and he was subsequently waived by every major league team. Although he earned about $14 million over his career, he lost a significant portion in a divorce from his first wife, who left him after the steroid scandal. In 2012, Daniel married Erin. They moved into a large 5-bedroom home in Reno, Nevada, valued at over $1 million. Many investments and business ventures failed in succession, eventually leading to bankruptcy. Even when he opened the bar, Daniel had to ask his parents-in-law for a loan and managed to raise $240,000 to keep it running. But his spending did not decrease. His financial ambitions were too great. He repeatedly sought financial help from his wealthy in-laws, Robert and Wendy. By 2015, Daniel had lost his savings and accumulated $300,000 in debt. He kept seeking financial support, but it couldn't go on indefinitely. During this time, his behavior deteriorated. Even staff reported he began physically abusing them, something he hadn't done before. Erin stood by him, remembering who he had been and seeing what he was becoming. She worked as a horse trainer and didn't earn much, but the family tried to maintain their lifestyle. Daniel was used to spending freely, but his income no longer matched. He even took a job at a gold mine near their lake house, yet it still wasn't enough to cover his debts. Despite the financial difficulties, his family continued to spend as usual. Erin supported Daniel so steadfastly that Adrian began to suspect she might have been involved in the attempt on their parents' lives. Samantha Scott had known the family for years. She worked as a nanny who frequently cared for Daniel and Erin's sons. She met Erin long before the attack, initially approaching Erin for horse riding lessons. Samantha also babysat for other families. When she first started coming to the house, Daniel reportedly fell in love with her. Daniel said he was unhappy in his marriage because, after having 2 sons in a previous marriage, he didn't want more children. Despite that, he and Erin had 2 additional children. He stayed with Erin for the children's sake, but planned to divorce her once they grew up. Samantha sympathized with his situation and began an affair with him. After Samantha was arrested, she denied everything. At first, even her sisters doubted her guilt. She has been a friend of Robert and Wendy's family for many years. During Wendy's recovery from the attack, Samantha regularly visited the lake house and met with everyone to offer support. But her true role in the events was still unclear. The investigation was reaching its peak, and prosecutors were preparing their case. The first person to go to trial is Daniel Serafini. At the preliminary hearing, the prosecution explained how they built their case and gathered evidence. Witnesses were crucial. One of Daniel's employees recognized him in the masked man video. Because of his distinctive gait, Daniel had a slight limp from a sports injury. Multiple witnesses also testified that he spread malicious rumors about his in-laws, Robert and Wendy, claiming they abused, beat, and starved their grandchildren during weekend or holiday visits. Years before the crime, other witnesses heard Daniel looking for a hitman to kill his wife's parents, offering $20,000 for the double murder, and approaching several men with legal troubles. A month before the crime, his attitude shifted. Daniel allegedly began saying he would kill Robert and Wendy himself. No one reported this because they didn't take him seriously. He was known to be hot-tempered and prone to dark jokes, so they assumed he was venting or joking. Investigators reconstructed the timeline. Daniel and Samantha stayed at a hotel in Verde, Nevada, near a gold mine where Daniel worked. The next day, their vehicles were seen near the mine. Initially, Samantha stated that on the day the murder occurred, she was at the hotel they had rented to secretly meet in Verde. Her story seemed credible. Cell phone data even supported it. But she made one mistake. A Subaru matching hers, without license plates, was seen near the lake house less than an hour before the attack. Detectives believe she dropped Daniel off near the house and waited to pick him up after the murders. Her car's geolocation confirmed she was near the crime scene at the time of the shooting. During the preliminary hearing, the defense strategy became clear. The defense attorney wants to persuade the jury that Wendy and Robert are cruel, manipulative people who, for many years, oppressed Daniel, forcing him to use force. They cited a 2018 restraining order against Robert after he provoked a conflict and attacked a fisherman near their home. The defense also attempted to shift suspicion to Adrian, claiming she benefited financially from Robert and Wendy's deaths and had accused Aaron and Daniel unfairly. Adrian's then-boyfriend was considered, but ruled out due to a solid alibi. A fierce legal battle loomed, and Samantha still faced trial. In February 2025, she accepted a plea deal. She would plead guilty to conspiracy. In return, prosecutors dropped the murder, attempted murder, and burglary charges. She would be tried only for complicity and, in exchange, testify against Daniel. After accepting the deal, she was placed under house arrest, angering Adrian and Aaron, who believed she belonged in prison. Daniel Serafini's trial began on May 19, 2025. Early in the proceedings, the prosecution presented messages in which Daniel told Samantha he would one day kill his in-laws, Robert and Wendy. The defense countered that Daniel had no motive to kill them because they paid many of their daughter's expenses and also supported him financially. Specifically, he received a $90,000 check from them just days before Robert's death. According to the prosecution, Samantha and Daniel had a highly emotional relationship. Because of her feelings, Samantha lied in 2021 to cover for him, though her perjury was excused under the plea agreement. A striking detail was that the affair continued even after Daniel was incarcerated. He regularly sent her love letters, decorated with origami roses made from prison toilet paper. The prosecution called several witnesses, including Daniel's former boss. He testified that one day, while driving Daniel to work, Daniel, in a fit of rage, said he wanted to kill his wife's parents, Robert and Wendy. He justified this by claiming they were abusing his children. He seemed to genuinely believe it. Yet there was no evidence supporting any abuse by Robert or Wendy. In response, the boss suggested Daniel simply stop taking the children to his in-laws' house to avoid conflict. Daniel refused and changed the subject. His former boss did not call the police because he believed Daniel's words were just a spur-of-the-moment outburst, not a serious one. The prosecutor also argued that Daniel's phone activity on the day of the shooting was suspicious. Normally he sent more than 100 texts a day and made frequent calls, but that day he sent none. An unusual change. Daniel's brother, Giorafini, also testified. According to Giorafini, Daniel tried to hire him to kill his parents-in-law for $20,000. Samantha, testifying against Daniel, said she drove him to the lake house and later picked him up after the double murder, though she claimed she did not know why he was going there. Daniel avoided discussing the murders, saying he was only trying to buy banned substance and hadn't planned to kill anyone. Samantha's credibility was questioned, but after accepting a plea deal, she said she was telling the truth. Even Daniel defended her, claiming she genuinely didn't know his plans. He kept his intentions secret, but asked her for a ride. From the start, his requests were suspicious. He wanted to remove all identifying marks from Samantha's car, even suggesting destroying it and reporting it stolen to the police. Samantha refused. Daniel then offered her $5,000 for the trip, on the condition that she replace the car afterward. She agreed, partly because he refused to share details. After she picked him up, he changed the route, and they took a long detour. While Samantha drove, Daniel threw clothing out of the car piece by piece. He got rid of a pair of gloves and a face mask, then disassembled a gun and disposed of its parts the same way. Samantha continued to insist that he never told her what happened and that she assumed he was being secretive because of a banned substance. She said that only months later, during the investigation, did Daniel admit to shooting Wendy, while saying nothing about Robert. When Daniel's wife, Erin, testified, she defended him and claimed Samantha had pushed Daniel toward murder. Erin said she felt deceived, not betrayed. Erin argued that it made no sense for Daniel to kill her parents, since they had been financially supporting the couple. Now that support was gone. The prosecution, however, argued that Erin was deluded and that the trial may have saved her life. They claimed that for Daniel to access Robert and Wendy's inheritance, he needed to remain married to Erin, and then she would have to die. In their view, Erin could have been the next target, as she was the final obstacle between Daniel and her parents' money. On July 14, 2025, a jury found 50-year-old Daniel Serafini guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and first-degree burglary. He faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. On August 19, 2025, before sentencing, Daniel filed a motion for a new trial. In February 2025, Samantha Scott pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact. She was released pending sentencing and faces up to 3 years in prison. Following the verdict, Erin Serafini filed for divorce and sought custody of her 2 sons, who were 7 and 4 years old at the time of Daniel's sentencing. Notably, she remained on good terms with Daniel throughout the trial and did not request restrictions on his visitation with the children. This led some people following the case to suspect Erin was involved, but there was never any evidence to support it. She was never charged, and her alleged involvement was never proven. Some neighbors and family friends cited her strained relationship with her parents as indirect evidence, but this remained hearsay. Erin was known to frequently ask her parents for money, which caused repeated conflicts. Even Adrian described Erin as a troublemaker and the family's black sheep.